The second of Chronicles, chapter 1. And Solomon the son of David continued to get strength in his kingship, and Jehovah his God was with him, and kept making him surpassingly great. And Solomon proceeded to say the word to all Israel, to the chiefs of the thousands, and of the hundreds, and to the judges, and to all the chieftains of all Israel, the heads of the paternal houses. Then Solomon and all the congregation with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for there was where the tent of meeting of the true God, which Moses the servant of Jehovah had made in the wilderness, happened to be. However, the ark of the true God David had brought up from Kiriath-Jearim, to the place that David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. And the copper altar that Bezalel the son of Uri, the son of Hur, had made, had been put before the tabernacle of Jehovah. And Solomon and the congregation applied as usual to it. Solomon now made offerings there before Jehovah upon the copper altar that belonged to the tent of meeting, and he proceeded to offer upon it 1,000 burnt offerings. During that night God appeared to Solomon, and then said to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" At that Solomon said to God, "You are the one that exercised great loving kindness toward David my father, and that have made me king in place of him. Now, O Jehovah God, let your promise with David my father prove faithful. For you yourself have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust particles of the earth. Give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out before this people, and that I may come in. For who could judge this great people of yours?" Then God said to Solomon, "For the reason that this has proved to be close to your heart, and you have not asked for wealth, riches, and honor, or for the soul of those hating you, neither is it even many days that you have asked for, but you ask for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may judge my people over whom I have made you king. The wisdom and the knowledge are being given you. Also wealth and riches and honor I shall give you, such as no kings that were prior to you happened to have, and such as no one after you will come to have." So Solomon came from the high place that was at Gibeon, from before the tent of meeting, to Jerusalem, and continued to reign over Israel. And Solomon kept gathering chariots and steeds, so that he came to have 1,400 chariots, and 12,000 steeds, and he kept them stationed in chariot cities and close by the king at Jerusalem. And the king came to make the silver and the gold in Jerusalem like the stones, and cedar wood he made like the sycamore trees that are in the Shephelah for great quantity. And there was the export of the horses that Solomon had from Egypt, and the company of the king's merchants would themselves take the horse drove for a price. And they customarily brought up and exported from Egypt a chariot for 600 silver pieces, and a horse for 150. And that was the way it was for all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. It was by means of them that they did the exporting. Chapter 2. Solomon now gave the word to build a house to Jehovah's name, and a house for his kingship. Accordingly, Solomon counted off 70,000 men as burden-bearers, and 80,000 men as cutters in the mountain, and as overseers over them 3,600. Further, Solomon sent to Hiram the king of Tyre, saying, "Just as you dealt with David my father, and you kept sending him cedar wood to build himself a house in which to dwell, here I am building a house to the name of Jehovah my God, to sanctify it to him, to burn perfumed incense before him, with the constant layer bread and burnt offerings in the morning and in the evening, on the Sabbaths and on the new moons, and at the festival seasons of Jehovah our God. To time indefinite this will be upon Israel. And the house that I am building will be great, for our God is greater than all the other gods. And who could retain power to build him a house? For the heavens and the heaven of the heavens cannot contain him. And who am I that I should build him a house, except for making sacrificial smoke before him? And now send me a skillful man to work in gold and in silver, and in copper and in iron, and in wool dyed reddish purple and crimson, and blue thread, and knowing how to cut engravings, along with the skillful ones that are with me in Judah and in Jerusalem, whom David my father has prepared. And send me timbers of cedar, juniper, and algum from Lebanon, for I myself well know that your servants are experienced at cutting down the trees of Lebanon. And here my servants are together with your servants, even for preparing timbers for me in great number, for the house that I am building will be great, yes, in a wonderful way. And look, to the gatherers of wood, the cutters of the trees, I do give wheat as food for your servants, 20,000 cors, and barley 20,000 cors, and wine 20,000 baths, and oil 20,000 baths. At that Hiram the king of Tyre said the word in writing, and sent it to Solomon. Because Jehovah loved his people, he has constituted you king over them. And Hiram went on to say, Blessed be Jehovah the God of Israel, who made the heavens and the earth, because he has given to David the king a wise son, experienced in discretion and understanding, who will build a house to Jehovah and a house for his kingship. And now I do send a skillful man, experienced in understanding, belonging to Hiram Abi, the son of a woman of the sons of Dan, but whose father was a man of Tyre, experienced to work in gold and in silver, in copper, in iron, in stones and in timbers, in wool dyed reddish purple, in blue thread and in fine fabric, and in crimson, and at cutting every sort of engraving, and at designing every sort of device that may be given to him, along with your own skillful men, and the skillful men of my lord David your father. And now the wheat and the barley, the oil and the wine that my lord has promised, let him send to his servants. As for ourselves, we shall cut down trees from Lebanon according to all your need, and we shall bring them to you as rafts by sea to Joppa, and you for your part will take them up to Jerusalem. Then Solomon took account of all the men that were alien residents who were in the land of Israel, after the census that David his father had taken of them. And there came to be found 153,600. So he made 70,000 of them burden-bearers, and 80,000 cutters in the mountain, and 3,600 overseers for keeping the people in service. Chapter 3. Finally, Solomon started to build the house of Jehovah in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where Jehovah had appeared to David his father, in the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Accordingly, he started to build in the 2nd month on the 2nd day in the 4th year of his reign. And these things Solomon laid as a foundation for building the house of the true God, the length in cubits by the former measurement being 60 cubits, and the width 20 cubits. And the porch that was in front of the length was 20 cubits in front of the width of the house, and its height was 120, and he proceeded to overlay it inside with pure gold. And the great house he covered with juniper wood, after which he covered it with good gold. And then he brought up upon it palm tree figures and chains. Further, he overlaid the house with precious stone for beauty, and the gold was gold from the gold country. And he went on to cover the house, the rafters, the thresholds and its walls and its doors with gold. And he engraved cherubs upon the walls. And he proceeded to make the house of the most holy, its length in relation to the width of the house being 20 cubits, and its own width being 20 cubits. And then he covered it with good gold to the amount of 600 talents. And the weight for the nails was 50 gold shekels, and the roof chambers he covered with gold. Then he made in the house of the most holy 2 cherubs in the workmanship of images, and overlaid them with gold. As for the wings of the cherubs, their length was 20 cubits, the one wing of 5 cubits reaching to the wall of the house, and the other wing of 5 cubits reaching to the wing of the other cherub. And the wing of the one cherub of 5 cubits was reaching to the wall of the house, and the other wing of 5 cubits was in contact with the wing of the other cherub. The wings of these cherubs were spread out 20 cubits, and they were standing upon their feet with their faces inward. Further, he made the curtain of blue thread and wool dyed reddish-purple, and crimson and fine fabric, and worked in cherubs upon it. Then he made before the house 2 pillars, 35 cubits in length, and the capital that was upon the top of each one was 5 cubits. Further, he made chains in necklace style, and put them upon the tops of the pillars, and made 100 pomegranates, and put them on the chains. And he proceeded to set up the pillars in front of the temple, one to the right and one to the left, after which he called the name of the right-hand one Jachin, and the name of the left-hand one Boaz. Chapter 4. Then he made the copper altar, 20 cubits being its length, and 20 cubits its width, and 10 cubits its height. And he proceeded to make the molten sea, 10 cubits from its one brim to its other brim, circular all around. And its height was 5 cubits, and it took a line of 30 cubits to circle all around it. And there was the likeness of gourd-shaped ornaments under it clear around, surrounding it, 10 in a cubit, enclosing the sea all around. The gourd-shaped ornaments were in 2 rows, being cast in its casting. It was standing upon 12 bulls, 3 facing the north, and 3 facing the west, and 3 facing the south, and 3 facing the east. And the sea was above upon them. And all their hind parts were inward, and its thickness was a handbreadth, and its brim was like the workmanship of the brim of a cup, a lily blossom. As a receptacle, 3,000 bath measures were what it could contain. Further, he made 10 basins, and put 5 to the right and 5 to the left, to wash in them. Things having to do with the burnt offering they would rinse in them, but the sea was for the priests to wash in it. He then made lampstands of gold, 10 of them of the same plan, and put them in the temple, 5 to the right and 5 to the left. Further, he made 10 tables, and stationed them in the temple, 5 to the right and 5 to the left, and made 100 bowls of gold. Then he made the courtyard of the priests and the great enclosure, and the doors belonging to the enclosure, and their doors he overlaid with copper. And the sea he placed at the right side, to the east, toward the south. Finally, Hiram made the cans and the shovels and the bowls. So Hiram finished doing the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the true God. The 2 pillars and the round capitals upon the top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 networks to cover the 2 round capitals that were upon the top of the pillars, and the 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 round capitals that were upon the pillars, and the 10 carriages, and the 10 basins upon the carriages, the one sea, and the 12 bulls under it, and the cans, and the shovels, and the forks, and all their utensils Hiram-Abiv made for King Solomon for the house of Jehovah, of polished copper. In the district of the Jordan, the king cast them in the thick ground between Succoth and Zeredah. Thus Solomon made all these utensils in very great quantity, for the weight of the copper was not ascertained. And Solomon proceeded to make all the utensils that were at the house of the true God, and the golden altar, and the tables with the showbread upon them, and the lampstands, and their lamps of pure gold, to light them up before the innermost room according to the rule, and the blossoms, and the lamps, and the snuffers of gold, it was the purest gold, and the extinguishers, and the bowls, and the cups, and the fire holders of pure gold, and the entrance of the house, its inner doors for the most holy, and the doors of the house of the temple, of gold. Chapter 5. Finally, all the work that Solomon had to do for the house of Jehovah was at its completion. And Solomon began to bring in the things made holy by David his father, and the silver and the gold, and all the utensils he put in the treasures of the house of the true God. It was then that Solomon proceeded to congregate the older men of Israel, and all the heads of the tribes, the chieftains of the paternal houses of the sons of Israel, to Jerusalem, to bring the ark of the covenant of Jehovah up from the city of David, that is to say, Zion. So all the men of Israel congregated themselves to the king at the festival, that of the 7th month. So all the older men of Israel came, and the Levites began to carry the ark. And they came bringing up the ark and the tent of meeting, and all the holy utensils that were in the tent. The priests, the Levites, brought them up. And King Solomon and all the assembly of Israelites that were keeping their appointment with him before the ark were sacrificing sheep and cattle that could not be counted or numbered for multitude. Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of Jehovah into its place, into the innermost room of the house, into the most holy, to underneath the wings of the cherubs. Thus the cherubs were continually spreading out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubs covered over the ark and its poles from above. But the poles were long, so that the tips of the poles were visible at the holy in front of the innermost room, but they were not visible outside, and they continue there down to this day. There was nothing in the ark but the 2 tablets that Moses had given at Horeb, when Jehovah covenanted with the sons of Israel while they were coming out from Egypt. And it came about, when the priests came out from the holy place, for all the priests that were to be found had for their part sanctified themselves, there was no need to observe the divisions, and the Levites that were singers belonging to all of them, namely to Asaph, to Heman, to Jeduthun, and to their sons and to their brothers, clothed in fine fabric with cymbals, and with stringed instruments and harps, were standing to the east of the altar, and along with them priests to the number of 120, sounding the trumpets. And it came about that as soon as the trumpeters and the singers were as one, in causing one sound to be heard, in praising and thanking Jehovah, and as soon as they lifted up the sound with the trumpets, and with the cymbals, and with the instruments of song, and with praising Jehovah, for he is good, for to time indefinite is his loving kindness, the house itself was filled with a cloud, the very house of Jehovah. And the priests were not able to stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of Jehovah filled the house of the true God. Chapter 6. It was then that Solomon said, Jehovah himself said he was to reside in the thick gloom, and I for my part have built a house of lofty abode for you, and an established place for you to dwell in to time indefinite. Then the king turned his face and began to bless all the congregation of Israel, while all the congregation of Israel were standing up. And he went on to say, Blessed be Jehovah the God of Israel, who spoke with his own mouth with David my father, and by his own hands has given fulfillment, saying, From the day that I brought my people out from the land of Egypt, I have not chosen a city out of all the tribes of Israel to build a house for my name to prove to be there. And I have not chosen a man to become leader over my people Israel. But I shall choose Jerusalem for my name to prove to be there, and I shall choose David to come to be over my people Israel. And it came to be close to the heart of David my father to build a house to the name of Jehovah the God of Israel. But Jehovah said to David my father, For the reason that it proved to be close to your heart to build a house to my name, you did well, because it proved to be close to your heart. Only you yourself will not build the house, but your son who is coming forth from your loins is the one that will build the house to my name. And Jehovah proceeded to carry out his word that he had spoken, that I might rise up in the place of David my father, and sit upon the throne of Israel, just as Jehovah had spoken, and that I might build the house to the name of Jehovah, the God of Israel, and that I might place there the ark where the covenant of Jehovah is, that he concluded with the sons of Israel. And he began standing before the altar of Jehovah in front of all the congregation of Israel, and he now spread out his palms. For Solomon had made a platform of copper, and then put it in the middle of the enclosure. Its length was 5 cubits, and its width 5 cubits, and its height 3 cubits, and he kept standing upon it. And he proceeded to kneel upon his knees in front of all the congregation of Israel, and to spread his palms out to the heavens. And he went on to say, O Jehovah, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in the heavens or on the earth, keeping the covenant and the loving kindness toward your servants, who are walking before you with all their heart. You who have kept toward your servant David my father what you promised him, so that you made the promise with your mouth, and with your own hand you have made fulfillment as at this day. And now, O Jehovah, the God of Israel, keep toward your servant David my father what you promised him, saying, There will not be cut off a man of yours from before me to sit upon the throne of Israel, if only your sons will take care of their way by walking in my law, just as you have walked before me. And now, O Jehovah, the God of Israel, let your promise that you have promised to your servant David prove trustworthy. But will God truly dwell with mankind upon the earth? Look, heaven, yes, the heaven of the heavens themselves cannot contain you. How much less, then, this house that I have built? And you must turn toward the prayer of your servant and to his request for favor, O Jehovah my God, by listening to the entreating cry and to the prayer with which your servant is praying before you, that your eyes may prove to be open toward this house day and night, toward the place where you said you would put your name, by listening to the prayer with which your servant prays toward this place. And you must listen to the entreaties of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place, that you yourself may hear from the place of your dwelling, from the heavens, and you must hear and forgive. If a man sins against his fellow man, and he actually lays a cursing upon him to bring him under liability to the curse, and he actually comes within the curse before your altar in this house, then may you yourself hear from the heavens, and you must act and judge your servants, so as to pay back the wicked by putting his course upon his own head, and by pronouncing the righteous one righteous, by giving to him according to his own righteousness. And if your people Israel are defeated before an enemy, because they kept sinning against you, and they indeed return and laud your name, and pray, and make request for favor before you in this house, then may you yourself hear from the heavens, and you must forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the ground that you gave to them and their forefathers. When the heavens are shut up, so that no rain occurs, because they kept sinning against you, and they actually pray toward this place, and laud your name, and from their sin they turn back because you kept afflicting them, then may you yourself hear from the heavens, and you must forgive the sin of your servants, even of your people Israel, because you instruct them regarding the good way in which they should walk. And you must give rain upon your land that you have given to your people as a hereditary possession. In case a famine occurs in the land, in case a pestilence occurs, in case scorching and mildew, locusts and cockroaches occur, in case their enemies besiege them in the land of their gates, any sort of plague and any sort of malady, whatever prayer, whatever request for favor there may occur on the part of any man or of all your people Israel, because they know each one his own plague and his own pain, when he actually spreads out his palms toward this house, then may you yourself hear from the heavens, the place of your dwelling, and you must forgive and give to each one according to all his ways, because you know his heart. For you yourself alone well know the heart of the sons of mankind, to the end that they may fear you by walking in your ways all the days that they are alive upon the surface of the ground that you gave to our forefathers. And also to the foreigner who is no part of your people Israel, and who actually comes from a distant land, by reason of your great name, and your strong hand, and your stretched out arm, and they actually come and pray toward this house, then may you yourself listen from the heavens, from your established place of dwelling, and you must do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you, in order that all the peoples of the earth may know your name, and may fear you, the same as your people Israel do, and may know that your name has been called upon this house that I have built. In case your people go out to the war against their enemies in the way that you send them, and they indeed pray to you in the direction of this city that you have chosen, and the house that I have built to your name, you must also hear from the heavens their prayer and their request for favor, and you must execute judgment for them. In case they sin against you, for there is no man that does not sin, and you have to be incensed at them, and abandon them to an enemy, and their captors actually carry them off captive to a land distant or nearby, and they indeed come to their senses in the land where they have been carried off captive, and they actually return and make request to you for favor in the land where they are captive, saying, We have sinned, we have erred, and we have acted wickedly. And they indeed return to you with all their heart, and with all their soul in the land where they are captives of those who carried them off captive. And they indeed pray in the direction of their land that you gave to their forefathers, and the city that you have chosen, and the house that I have built to your name. You must also hear from the heavens, from your established place of dwelling, their prayer and their requests for favor, and you must execute judgment for them, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Now, O my God, please, let your eyes prove to be opened, and your ears attentive to the prayer respecting this place. And now do rise up, O Jehovah God, into your rest, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests themselves, O Jehovah God, be clothed with salvation, and let your loyal ones themselves rejoice in goodness. O Jehovah God, do not turn back the face of your anointed one. O do remember the loving kindnesses to David your servant. Chapter 7. Now, as soon as Solomon finished praying, the fire itself came down from the heavens and proceeded to consume the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and Jehovah's glory itself filled the house. And the priests were unable to enter into the house of Jehovah, because Jehovah's glory had filled the house of Jehovah. And all the sons of Israel were spectators when the fire came down, and the glory of Jehovah was upon the house. And they immediately bowed low with their faces to the earth upon the pavement, and prostrated themselves and thanked Jehovah. For he is good, for his loving kindness is to time indefinite. And the king and all the people were offering sacrifice before Jehovah. And King Solomon went on offering the sacrifice of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. Thus the king and all the people inaugurated the house of the true God. And the priests were standing at their posts of duty, and the Levites with the instruments of song to Jehovah that David the king had made to thank Jehovah, for his loving kindness is to time indefinite, when David would render praise by their hand. And the priests were loudly sounding the trumpets in front of them, while all the Israelites were standing. Then Solomon sanctified the middle of the courtyard that was before the house of Jehovah, because there he rendered up the burnt offerings and the fat pieces of the communion sacrifices, for the copper altar that Solomon had made was itself not able to contain the burnt offering and the grain offering and the fat pieces. And Solomon proceeded to hold the festival at that time for 7 days, and all Israel with him, a very great congregation, from the entering in of Hamath down to the torrent valley of Egypt. But on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly, because the inauguration of the altar they had held for 7 days, and the festival for 7 days. And on the 23rd day of the 7th month he sent the people away to their homes, joyful and feeling good at heart over the goodness that Jehovah had performed toward David, and toward Solomon, and toward Israel his people. Thus Solomon finished the house of Jehovah and the house of the king. And in everything that had come into Solomon's heart to do regarding the house of Jehovah and his own house, he proved successful. Jehovah now appeared to Solomon during the night and said to him, I have heard your prayer, and I have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. When I shut up the heavens, that no rain may occur, and when I command the grasshoppers to eat up the land, and if I send a pestilence among my people, and my people upon whom my name has been called humble themselves, and pray, and seek my face, and turn back from their bad ways, then I myself shall hear from the heavens, and forgive their sin, and I shall heal their land. Now my own eyes will prove to be opened, and my ears attentive to prayer at this place. And now I do choose and sanctify this house, that my name may prove to be there to time indefinite. and my eyes and my heart will certainly prove to be there always. And if you yourself will walk before me, just as David your father walked, even by doing according to all that I have commanded you, and you will keep my regulations and my judicial decisions, I will also establish the throne of your kingship, just as I covenanted with David your father, saying, There will not a man of yours be cut off from ruling over Israel. But if you yourselves turn back, and actually leave my statutes and my commandments that I have put before you, and you actually go and serve other gods, and bow down to them, I will also uproot them from off my ground that I have given them. And this house that I have sanctified for my name, I shall throw away from before my face. And I shall make it a proverbial saying and a taunt among all the peoples. As for this house that had become heaps of ruins, everyone passing by it will stare in amazement, and be certain to say, For what reason did Jehovah do like that to this land and to this house? And they will have to say, It was for the reason that they left Jehovah the God of their forefathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they proceeded to take hold of other gods, and bow down to them, and serve them. That is why he brought upon them all this calamity. Chapter 8. And it came about at the end of 20 years, in which Solomon had built the house of Jehovah and his own house, that the cities that Hiram had given to Solomon rebuilt them, and then caused the sons of Israel to dwell there. Furthermore, Solomon went to Hamath-zobah and prevailed over it. Then he rebuilt Tadmor in the wilderness, and all the storage cities that he had built in Hamath. And he went on to build Upper Beth-horon and Lower Beth-horon, fortified cities with walls, doors, and bar, and Baalath, and all the storage cities that had become Solomon's, and all the chariot cities, and the cities for the horsemen, and every desirable thing of Solomon that he had desired to build in Jerusalem, and in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. As for all the people that were left over of the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were no part of Israel, from their sons that had been left behind them in the land, whom the sons of Israel had not exterminated, Solomon kept levying men for forced labor until this day. But there were none out of the sons of Israel that Solomon constituted slaves for his work. For they were warriors and chiefs of his adjutants, and chiefs of his charioteers and of his horsemen. These were the chiefs of the deputies that belonged to King Solomon, 250, the foremen over the people. And Pharaoh's daughter Solomon brought up out of the city of David to the house that he had built for her. For he said, Although a wife of mine, she should not dwell in the house of David the king of Israel, for the places to which the ark of Jehovah has come are something holy. It was then that Solomon offered up burnt sacrifices to Jehovah upon the altar of Jehovah that he had built before the porch, even as a daily matter of course to make offerings according to the commandment of Moses, for the Sabbaths, and for the new moons, and for the appointed festivals, 3 times in the year, at the festival of unfermented cakes, and at the festival of the weeks, and at the festival of the booths. Further, he set the divisions of the priests over their services according to the rule of David his father, and the Levites at their posts of duty, to praise and to minister in front of the priests as a daily matter of course, and the gatekeepers in their divisions for the different gates, for such was the commandment of David, the man of the true God. And they did not turn aside from the king's commandment to the priests and the Levites concerning any matter, and concerning the supplies. So Solomon's work was all in a prepared state from the day of the foundation laying of the house of Jehovah until it was finished. So the house of Jehovah was complete. It was then that Solomon went to Ezion-Geber and to Eloth upon the shore of the sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram regularly sent to him by means of his servants ships and servants having a knowledge of the sea. And they would come with Solomon's servants to Ophir, and take from there 450 talents of gold, and bring it to King Solomon. Chapter 9. And the queen of Sheba herself heard the report about Solomon, and she proceeded to come to test Solomon with perplexing questions at Jerusalem, along with a very impressive train and camels carrying balsam oil, and gold in great quantity, and precious stones. At length she came into Solomon, and spoke with him about everything that happened to be close to her heart. Solomon, in turn, went on to tell her all her matters, and no matter was hidden from Solomon that he did not tell her. When the queen of Sheba got to see Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the food of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the table service of his waiters, and their attire, and his drinking service, and their attire, and his burnt sacrifices that he regularly offered up at the house of Jehovah, then there proved to be no more spirit in her. So she said to the king, "True was the word that I heard in my own land about your matters, and about your wisdom. And I did not put faith in their words until I had come that my own eyes might see. And look, there has not been told me the half of the abundance of your wisdom. You have surpassed the report that I have heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these servants of yours who are standing before you constantly and listening to your wisdom. May Jehovah your God come to be blessed, who has taken delight in you by putting you upon his throne as king for Jehovah your God, because your God loved Israel, to make it stand to time indefinite, so that he put you over them as king to execute judicial decision and righteousness." Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and balsam oil in very great quantity, and precious stones. And there had not come to be the like of that balsam oil which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And besides, the servants of Hiram and the servants of Solomon, who brought gold from Ophir, brought timbers of algum trees and precious stones. And the king proceeded to make out of the timbers of the algum trees stairs for the house of Jehovah and for the king's house, and also harps and stringed instruments for the singers, and the like of them had never been seen before in the land of Judah. And King Solomon himself gave the queen of Sheba all her delight for which she had asked, besides the value of what she brought to the king. So she turned about and went to her own land, she together with her servants. And the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year amounted to 666 talents of gold, aside from the men of travel and the merchants who were bringing in, and all the kings of the Arabs and the governors of the land who were bringing in gold and silver to Solomon. And King Solomon went on to make 200 large shields of alloyed gold. 600 shekels of alloyed gold he proceeded to lay upon each large shield, and 300 bucklers of alloyed gold. 3 minas of gold he proceeded to lay upon each buckler. Then the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Further, the king made a great ivory throne, and overlaid it with pure gold. And there were 6 steps to the throne, and there was a footstool in gold to the throne, they were attached, and there were armrests on this side and on that side, by the place of sitting, and 2 lions were standing beside the armrests. And there were 12 lions standing there upon the 6 steps on this side and on that side. No other kingdom had any made just like it. And all the drinking vessels of King Solomon were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. There was nothing of silver. It was considered as nothing at all in the days of Solomon. For ships belonging to the king were going to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Once every 3 years, ships of Tarshish would come in, carrying gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. So King Solomon was greater than all the other kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. And all the kings of the earth were seeking the face of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which the true God had put in his heart. And they were bringing each his gift, articles of silver and articles of gold and garments, armor and balsam oil, horses and mules, as a yearly matter of course. And Solomon came to have 4,000 stalls of horses and chariots, and 12,000 steeds, and he kept them stationed in the chariot cities, and close by the king in Jerusalem. And he came to be ruler over all the kings from the river down to the land of the Philistines, and down to the boundary of Egypt. Furthermore, the king made the silver in Jerusalem like the stones, and cedar wood he made like the sycamore trees that are in the Shephelah, for abundance. And there were those bringing out horses to Solomon from Egypt, and from all the other lands. As for the rest of the affairs of Solomon, the first and the last, are they not written among the words of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the record of visions of Iddo the visionary, concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat? And Solomon continued to reign in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Finally Solomon lay down with his forefathers. So they buried him in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 10. And Rehoboam proceeded to go to Shechem, for it was to Shechem that all the Israelites came to make him king. And it came about that as soon as Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it while he was yet in Egypt, because he had run away on account of Solomon the king, Jeroboam immediately came back from Egypt. So they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father for his part made our yoke hard. And now make the hard service of your father and the heavy yoke that he put upon us lighter, and we shall serve you. At this he said to them, Let there be yet 3 days, then return to me. So the people went away. And King Rehoboam began to take counsel with the older men that were continually attending upon Solomon his father, while he continued alive, saying, How are you advising to reply to this people? Accordingly they spoke to him, saying, If you would prove yourself good to this people, and actually be pleasing to them, and indeed speak good words to them, they also will certainly become your servants always. However, he left the counsel of the older men with which they had advised him, and he began to take counsel with the young men that had grown up with him, who were the ones attending upon him. And he went on to say to them, What is it that you are offering in counsel, that we may reply to this people who have spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke that your father put upon us lighter? In turn the young men that had grown up with him spoke with him, saying, This is what you should say to the people who have spoken to you, saying, Your father for his part made our yoke heavy, but as for you, make it lighter upon us. This is what you should say to them. My own little finger will certainly be thicker than my father's hips. And now my father for his part loaded upon you a heavy yoke, but I for my part shall add to your yoke. My father for his part chastised you with whips, but I for my part with scourges. And Jeroboam and all the people proceeded to come to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, just as the king had spoken, saying, Return to me on the 3rd day." And the king began to answer them harshly. Thus King Rehoboam left the counsel of the older men, and he went on to speak to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, "I shall make your yoke heavier, and I for my part shall add to it. My father for his part chastised you with whips, but I for my part with scourges." And the king did not listen to the people, for it proved to be a turn of affairs from the true God, in order that Jehovah might carry out his word that he had spoken by means of Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. As for all Israel, because the king did not listen to them, the people now replied to the king, saying, "What share do we have in David? And there is no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Each one to your gods, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David." With that, all Israel began to go to its tents. As for the sons of Israel that were dwelling in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam continued to reign over them. Subsequently, King Rehoboam sent Hadoram, who was over those conscripted for forced labor, but the sons of Israel pelted him with stones, so that he died. And King Rehoboam himself managed to get up into his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. And the Israelites kept up their revolt against the house of David down to this day. Chapter 11. When Rehoboam arrived at Jerusalem, he immediately congregated the house of Judah and Benjamin, 180,000 choice men able-bodied for war, to fight against Israel, so as to bring the kingdom back to Rehoboam. Then the word of Jehovah came to Shemaiah, the man of the true God, saying, "Say to Rehoboam the son of Solomon, the king of Judah, and to all Israel in Judah and Benjamin, saying, This is what Jehovah has said. You must not go up and fight against your brothers. Return each one to his house, for it is at my own instance that this thing has been brought about." So they obeyed the word of Jehovah, and returned from going against Jeroboam. And Rehoboam continued to dwell in Jerusalem, and proceeded to build fortified cities in Judah. Thus he rebuilt Bethlehem, and Etam, and Tekoa, and Bethsur, and Soko, and Adullam, and Gath, and Marisha, and Ziph, and Adoraim, and Lachish, and Azekah, and Zorah, and Aijalon, and Hebron, fortified cities which were in Judah and Benjamin. Further, he reinforced the fortified places, and put leaders in them, and suppliers of food and oil and wine, and in all the different cities large shields and lances, and he went on reinforcing them to a very great degree, and Judah and Benjamin continued his. And the priests and the Levites themselves that were in all Israel took their stand by him out of all their territories. For the Levites left their pasture grounds and their possession, and then came to Judah and Jerusalem, because Jeroboam and his sons had discharged them from acting as priests to Jehovah. And he proceeded to put in office for himself priests for the high places, and for the goat-shaped demons, and for the calves that he had made. And following them from all the tribes of Israel, those that were giving their heart to seek Jehovah the God of Israel, came themselves to Jerusalem to sacrifice to Jehovah the God of their forefathers. And they kept strengthening the kingship of Judah, and confirming Rehoboam the son of Solomon for 3 years. For they walked in the way of David and Solomon for 3 years. Then Rehoboam took as his wife Mahalath, the daughter of Jeremoth, the son of David, and of Abihail, the daughter of Eliab, the son of Jesse. In time she bore him sons, Jeush and Shemariah and Zaham. And after her he took Maacah, the granddaughter of Absalom. In time she bore him Abijah and Attai, and Zisah and Shelomith. And Rehoboam was more in love with Maacah, the granddaughter of Absalom, than all his other wives and his concubines. For there were 18 wives that he had taken, also 60 concubines, so that he became father to 28 sons and 60 daughters. Consequently, Rehoboam put Abijah the son of Maacah in office as head, as leader among his brothers, for he thought of making him king. However, he acted understandingly, and distributed some out of all his sons to all the lands of Judah and of Benjamin, to all the fortified cities, and gave them food in abundance, and procured a multitude of wives for them. Chapter 12. And it came about that as soon as the kingship of Rehoboam was firmly established, and as soon as he was strong, he left the law of Jehovah, and also all Israel with him. And it came about in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, that Shishak the king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem, for they had behaved unfaithfully toward Jehovah, with 1,200 chariots and with 60,000 horsemen. And there was no number to the people that came with him out of Egypt, Libyans, Sukium, and Ethiopians. And he got to capture the fortified cities that belonged to Judah, and finally came as far as Jerusalem. Now as for Shemaiah the prophet, he came to Rehoboam and the princes of Judah, who had gathered themselves at Jerusalem because of Shishak, and he proceeded to say to them, This is what Jehovah has said. You for your part have left me, and I too for my part have left you to the hand of Shishak. At that, the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves and said, Jehovah is righteous. And when Jehovah saw that they had humbled themselves, the word of Jehovah came to Shemaiah, saying, They have humbled themselves. I shall not bring them to ruin, and in a little while I shall certainly give them an escape, and my rage will not pour forth upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. But they will become servants of his, that they may know the difference between my service and the service of the kingdoms of the lands. So Shishak the king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem, and took the treasures of the house of Jehovah and the treasures of the king's house. Everything he took. And so he took the gold shields that Solomon had made. Consequently King Rehoboam made in their place copper shields, and he committed them to the control of the chiefs of the runners, the guards of the entrance of the king's house. And it would occur that as often as the king came to the house of Jehovah, the runners came in and carried them, and returned them to the guard chamber of the runners. And because he humbled himself, Jehovah's anger turned back from him, and he did not think of bringing them to ruin completely. And besides, there happened to be good things in Judah. And King Rehoboam continued to make his position strong in Jerusalem, and kept reigning. For Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and for 17 years he reigned in Jerusalem, the city that Jehovah had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, the Ammonitess. But he did what was bad, for he had not firmly established his heart to search for Jehovah. As for Rehoboam's affairs, the first and the last, are they not written among the words of Shemaiah the prophet and of Iddo the visionary by genealogical enrollment? And there were wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the time. Finally, Rehoboam lay down with his forefathers, and was buried in the city of David, and Abijah his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 13. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, it was that Abijah began to reign over Judah. 3 years he reigned in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Micaiah, the daughter of Uriah of Gibeah. And war itself took place between Abijah and Jeroboam. So Abijah engaged in the war with a military force of 400,000 mighty men of war, chosen men. And Jeroboam himself drew up in battle formation against him with 800,000 chosen men, valiant mighty men. Abijah now rose up upon Mount Zemaraim, which is in the mountainous region of Ephraim, and said, Hear me, O Jeroboam, and all Israel. Is it not for you to know that Jehovah the God of Israel himself gave a kingdom to David over Israel to time indefinite, to him and to his sons by a covenant of salt? And Jeroboam the son of Nebat, the servant of Solomon the son of David, proceeded to rise up and rebel against his Lord. And idle men, good-for-nothing fellows, kept collecting themselves together by him. Finally they proved superior to Rehoboam the son of Solomon, when Rehoboam himself happened to be young and faint-hearted, and he did not hold his own against them. And now you men are thinking of holding your own against the kingdom of Jehovah in the hand of the sons of David, when you are a large crowd, and there are with you the golden calves that Jeroboam made for you as gods. Have you not driven out Jehovah's priests, the sons of Aaron, and the Levites? And do you not keep making priests for yourselves like the peoples of the lands? As for anyone that came and filled his hand with power by means of a young bull and 7 rams, he became a priest of what are no gods. As for us, Jehovah is our God, and we have not left him. But priests are ministering to Jehovah, the sons of Aaron, and also the Levites in the work. And they are making burnt offering smoke to Jehovah morning by morning, and evening by evening, and also perfumed incense. And the layers of bread are upon the table of pure gold, and there are the golden lampstand and its lamps to light up evening by evening, because we are keeping the obligation to Jehovah our God. But you yourselves have left him. And look, with us there is at the head the true God with his priests, and the signal trumpets for sounding the battle alarm against you. O sons of Israel, do not fight against Jehovah the God of your forefathers, for you will not prove successful. And Jeroboam, for his part, dispatched an ambush around to come behind them, so that they proved to be in front of Judah, and the ambush behind them. When those of Judah turned around, why, there they had the battle in front and behind. And they began to cry out to Jehovah, while the priests were loudly sounding the trumpets. And the men of Judah broke out shouting a war cry. And it came about that when the men of Judah shouted a war cry, then the true God himself defeated Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijah and Judah. And the sons of Israel took to flight from before Judah, and then God gave them into their hand. And Abijah and his people went striking them down with a vast slaughter, and the slain of Israel kept falling down, 500,000 chosen men. Thus the sons of Israel were humbled at that time, but the sons of Judah proved superior because they leaned upon Jehovah the God of their forefathers. And Abijah kept chasing after Jeroboam, and got to capture cities from him, Bethel and its dependent towns, and Jeshanah and its dependent towns, and Ephraim and its dependent towns. And Jeroboam did not retain any more power in the days of Abijah, but Jehovah dealt him a blow, so that he died. And Abijah continued to strengthen himself. In time he got 14 wives for himself, and became father to 22 sons and 16 daughters. And the rest of Abijah's affairs, even his ways and his words, are written in the exposition of the prophet Iddo. Chapter 14. Finally Abijah lay down with his forefathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And Asa his son began to reign in place of him. In his days the land had no disturbance for 10 years, and Asa proceeded to do what was good and right in the eyes of Jehovah his God. So he removed the foreign altars and the high places, and broke up the sacred pillars, and cut down the sacred poles. Further he said to Judah to search for Jehovah the God of their forefathers, and do the law and the commandment. Accordingly, he removed from all the cities of Judah the high places and the incense stands, and the kingdom continued without disturbance before him. And he went on to build fortified cities in Judah, for the land had no disturbance, and there was no war against him during these years, for Jehovah gave him rest. So he said to Judah, "Let us build these cities and make walls around and towers, double doors and bars. For us the land is yet available, because we have searched for Jehovah our God. We have searched, and he gives us rest all around." And they went building and proving successful. And Asa came to have a military force bearing the large shield and lance, 300,000 out of Judah, and out of Benjamin those bearing the buckler and bending the bow were 280,000. All these were valiant, mighty men. Later Zerah, the Ethiopian, went out against them with a military force of 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots, and came as far as Mareshah. Then Asa went out against him, and they drew up in battle formation in the valley of Zephathah at Mareshah. And Asa began to call to Jehovah his God and say, "O Jehovah, as to helping, it does not matter with you whether there are many or those with no power. Help us, O Jehovah our God, for upon you we do lean, and in your name we have come against this crowd. O Jehovah, you are our God. Do not let mortal man retain strength against you." At that, Jehovah defeated the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians took to flight. And Asa and the people that were with him kept pursuing them as far as Gerah, and those of the Ethiopians continued falling down till there was no one alive of them, for they were broken to pieces before Jehovah and before his camp. Afterward they carried off a very great deal of spoil. Further, they struck all the cities round about Gerah, for the dread of Jehovah had come to be upon them, and they went plundering all the cities, for there happened to be much to plunder in them. And even the tents with livestock they struck, so that they took captive flocks in great number and camels, after which they returned to Jerusalem. Chapter 15. Now for Azariah the son of Oded, the Spirit of God came to be upon him. Consequently he went out before Asa and said to him, "Hear me, O Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. Jehovah is with you, as long as you prove to be with him. And if you search for him, he will let himself be found by you. But if you leave him, he will leave you." And many were the days that Israel had been without a true God, and without a priest teaching, and without law. But when in their distress they returned to Jehovah the God of Israel, and looked for him, then he let himself be found by them. And in those times there was no peace for one going out or for one coming in, because there were many disorders among all the inhabitants of the lands. And they were crushed to pieces, nation against nation, and city against city, because God himself kept them in disorder with every sort of distress. And you, be courageous, and do not let your hands drop down, because there exists a reward for your activity. And as soon as Asa heard these words and the prophecy of Oded the prophet, he took courage, and proceeded to cause the disgusting things to vanish from all the land of Judah and Benjamin, and from the cities that he had captured from the mountainous region of Ephraim, and to renew Jehovah's altar that was before the porch of Jehovah. And he began to collect together all Judah and Benjamin, and the alien residents with them from Ephraim and Manasseh and Simeon, for they had deserted to him from Israel in great number, when they saw that Jehovah his God was with him. So they were collected together at Jerusalem in the 3rd month of the 15th year of Asa's reign. Then they sacrificed to Jehovah on that day from the spoil they had brought 700 cattle and 7,000 sheep. Furthermore, they entered into a covenant to search for Jehovah the God of their forefathers with all their heart and with all their soul, that anyone that would not search for Jehovah the God of Israel should be put to death, whether small or great, whether man or woman. So they swore to Jehovah with a loud voice, and with joyful shouting, and with the trumpets and with horns. And all Judah gave way to rejoicing over the things sworn, for it was with all their heart that they had sworn, and with full pleasure on their part that they had looked for him, so that he let himself be found by them, and Jehovah continued to give them rest all around. As for even Maacah, his grandmother, Asa the king himself removed her from being lady, because she had made a horrible idol for the sacred pole. And then Asa cut down her horrible idol, and pulverized it, and burned it in the torrent valley of Kidron. And the high places themselves did not disappear from Israel. Only Asa's heart itself proved to be complete all his days. And he proceeded to bring the things made holy by his father, and the things made holy by himself into the house of the true God, silver and gold and utensils. As for war, it did not occur down to the 35th year of Asa's reign. Chapter 16. In the 36th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, the king of Israel, came up against Judah, and began to build Ramah, so as not to allow anyone to go out or come in to Asa, the king of Judah. Asa now brought out silver and gold from the treasures of Jehovah's house, and the king's house, and sent to Ben-Hadad the king of Syria, who was dwelling at Damascus, saying, There is a covenant between me and you, and between my father and your father. Here I do send you silver and gold. Go, break your covenant with Baasha the king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me. So Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa, and sent the chiefs of the military forces that were his against the cities of Israel, so that they struck Ijon and Dan and Abel-Maim, and all the storage places of the cities of Naphtali. And it came about that as soon as Baasha heard of it, he immediately quit building Ramah and stopped his work. As for Asa the king, he took all Judah, and they proceeded to carry away the stones of Ramah and its timbers, with which Baasha had built, and he began to build with them Geba and Mizpah. And at that time Hanani the seer came to Asa the king of Judah, and then said to him, Because you leaned upon the king of Syria, and did not lean upon Jehovah your God, for that reason the military force of the king of Syria has escaped out of your hand. Did not the Ethiopians and the Libyans themselves happen to be a very great military force in multitude, in chariots and in horsemen? And because of your leaning upon Jehovah, did he not give them into your hand? For as regards Jehovah, his eyes are roving about through all the earth, to show his strength in behalf of those whose heart is complete toward him. You have acted foolishly respecting this, for from now on there will exist wars against you. However, Asa became offended at the seer, and put him in the house of the stocks, because he was in a rage at him over this. And Asa began to crush some others of the people at that same time. And look, the affairs of Asa, the first and the last, there they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and of Israel. And Asa, in the 39th year of his reign, developed an ailment in his feet until he was very sick. And even in his sickness he searched not for Jehovah, but for the healers. Finally, Asa lay down with his forefathers and died in the 41st year of his reigning. So they buried him in his grand burial place that he had excavated for himself in the city of David. And they laid him in the bed that had been filled with balsam oil, and different sorts of ointment mixed in an ointment of special make. Further, they made an extraordinarily great funeral burning for him. Chapter 17. And Jehoshaphat his son began to reign in place of him, and to make his position strong over Israel. And he proceeded to put military forces in all the fortified cities of Judah, and to put garrisons in the land of Judah and in the cities of Ephraim that Asa his father had captured. And Jehovah continued with Jehoshaphat, because he walked in the former ways of David his forefather, and did not search for the Baals. For it was for the God of his father that he searched, and in his commandment he walked, and not according to the doing of Israel. And Jehovah kept the kingdom firmly established in his hand. And all Judah continued to give presents to Jehoshaphat, and he came to have riches and glory in abundance. And his heart became bold in the ways of Jehovah, and he even removed the high places and the sacred poles from Judah. And in the 3rd year of his reigning he sent for his princes, namely, Ben-Hail, and Obadiah, and Zechariah, and Nathanael, and Micaiah, to teach in the cities of Judah, and with them the Levites, Shemaiah, and Nethaniah, and Zebadiah, and Asahel, and Shemiramoth, and Jehonathan, and Adonijah, and Tobijah, and Tobadonijah, the Levites, and with them Elishama and Jehoram, the priests. And they began teaching in Judah, and with them there was the book of Jehovah's law. And they kept going around through all the cities of Judah, and teaching among the people. And the dread of Jehovah came to be upon all the kingdoms of the lands that were all around Judah, and they did not fight against Jehoshaphat. And from the Philistines they were bringing to Jehoshaphat presents and money as tribute. The Arabs also were bringing to him flocks, 7,700 rams, and 7,700 he-goats. And Jehoshaphat continued advancing and growing great to a superior degree. And he went on building fortified places and storage cities in Judah. And there were many interests that became his in the cities of Judah, and warriors, valiant mighty men were in Jerusalem. And these were their officers by the house of their forefathers. Of Judah the chiefs of thousands, Adnah the chief, and with him there were 300,000 valiant mighty men. And under his control there was Jehohanan the chief, and with him there were 280,000. And under his control there was Amasiah the son of Zichri, the volunteer for Jehovah, and with him there were 200,000 valiant mighty men. And out of Benjamin there was the valiant mighty man Eliada, and with him there were 200,000 men equipped with the bow and shield. And under his control there was Jehozabad, and with him there were 180,000 men outfitted for the army. These were the ones ministering to the king, apart from those whom the king put in the fortified cities throughout all Judah. Chapter 18. And Jehoshaphat came to have riches and glory in abundance. But he formed a marriage alliance with Ahab. So years later he went down to Ahab at Samaria. And Ahab proceeded to sacrifice sheep and cattle in abundance for him, and for the people that were with him. and he began to allure him to go up against Ramoth-Gilead. And Ahab the king of Israel went on to say to Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, "Will you go with me to Ramoth-Gilead?" At this he said to him, "I am the same as you are, and my people are like your people, and with you in the war." However, Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "Please inquire first of all for the word of Jehovah." So the king of Israel collected the prophets together, 400 men, and said to them, "Shall we go against Ramoth-Gilead in war, or shall I refrain?" And they began to say, "Go up, and the true God will give it into the king's hand." But Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not here a prophet of Jehovah still? Then let us inquire through him." At that the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "There is still one man through whom to inquire of Jehovah, but I myself certainly hate him, for he is prophesying concerning me not for good, but all his days for bad. He is Micaiah the son of Imlah." However, Jehoshaphat said, "Do not let the king say a thing like that." Accordingly the king of Israel called a court official and said, "Bring Micaiah the son of Imlah quickly." Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah were sitting each one on his throne, clothed in garments, and were sitting in the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets were acting as prophets before them. Then Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah made for himself horns of iron, and said, "This is what Jehovah has said, with these you will push the Syrians until you exterminate them." And all the other prophets were prophesying the same as that, saying, "Go up to Ramoth-Gilead, and prove successful, and Jehovah will certainly give it into the king's hand." And the messenger that went to call Micaiah spoke to him, saying, "Look, the words of the prophets are unanimously of good to the king, and let your word please become like one of them, and you must speak good." But Micaiah said, "As Jehovah is living, what my God will say, that is what I shall speak." Then he came into the king, and the king proceeded to say to him, "Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead in war, or shall I refrain?" At once he said, "Go up, and prove successful, and they will be given into your hand." At that the king said to him, "For how many times am I putting you under oath that you should not speak to me anything but truth in the name of Jehovah?" So he said, "I certainly see all the Israelites scattered upon the mountains like sheep that have no shepherd." And Jehovah went on to say, "These have no masters. Let them go back, each one to his house in peace." Then the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Did I not say to you, he will prophesy concerning me not good things, but bad?" And he went on to say, "Therefore hear the word of Jehovah. I certainly see Jehovah sitting upon his throne, and all the army of the heavens standing at his right and his left." And Jehovah proceeded to say, "Who will fool Ahab the king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead?" And there was talk, this one saying something like this, and that one saying something like that. Finally a spirit came out and stood before Jehovah and said, "I myself shall fool him." At that Jehovah said to him, "By what means?" To this he said, "I shall go forth and certainly become a deceptive spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." So he said, "You will fool him, and what is more, you will come off the winner. Go out and do that way." And now here Jehovah has put a deceptive spirit in the mouth of these prophets of yours. But Jehovah himself has spoken calamity concerning you. Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah now approached and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, "In just which way did the Spirit of Jehovah pass along from me to speak with you?" At that Micaiah said, Look, you are seeing which way on that day when you will enter the innermost chamber to hide yourself. Then the king of Israel said, Take Micaiah and turn him back to Amon, the chief of the city, and to Joash, the king's son. And you men must say, This is what the king has said. Put this fellow in the house of detention, and feed him with a reduced allowance of bread, and a reduced allowance of water, until I return in peace. Upon that, Micaiah said, If you return at all in peace, Jehovah has not spoken with me. And he added, Hear, all you peoples. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah proceeded to go up to Ramoth-Gilead. The king of Israel now said to Jehoshaphat, There will be a disguising and entering into the battle for me. But you, for your part, put on your garments. Accordingly the king of Israel disguised himself, after which they entered into the battle. As for the king of Syria, he had commanded the chiefs of the chariots that were his, saying, You must fight neither with the small nor with the great, but with the king of Israel alone. And it came about that as soon as the chiefs of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they for their part said to themselves, It is the king of Israel. So they turned around against him to fight. And Jehoshaphat began to cry for aid, and Jehovah himself helped him, and God at once allured them away from him. And it came about that as soon as the chiefs of the chariots saw that it did not prove to be the king of Israel, they immediately came back from following him. And there was a man that bent the bow in his innocence, but he got to strike the king of Israel between the appendages and the coat of mail, so that he said to the charioteer, Turn your hand around, and you must take me out from the camp, because I have been badly wounded. And the battle kept rising in intensity on that day, and the king of Israel himself had to be kept in a standing position in the chariot, facing the Syrians until the evening. And gradually he died at the time of the setting of the sun. Chapter 19. Then Jehoshaphat the king of Judah returned in peace to his own house at Jerusalem. Jehu the son of Hanani the visionary now went out before him, and said to King Jehoshaphat, Is it to the wicked that help is to be given? And is it for those hating Jehovah that you should have love? And for this there is indignation against you from the person of Jehovah. Nevertheless, there are good things that have been found with you, because you have cleared out the sacred poles from the land, and you have prepared your heart to search for the true God. And Jehoshaphat continued dwelling in Jerusalem, and he began to go out again among the people from Beersheba to the mountainous region of Ephraim, that he might bring them back to Jehovah the God of their forefathers. And he proceeded to station judges throughout the land in all the fortified cities of Judah, city by city. And he went on to say to the judges, See what you are doing, because it is not for man that you judge, but it is for Jehovah, and he is with you in the matter of judgment. And now let the dread of Jehovah come to be upon you. Be careful and act, for with Jehovah our God there is no unrighteousness, or partiality, or taking of a bribe. And in Jerusalem also Jehoshaphat stationed some of the Levites and the priests, and some of the heads of the paternal houses of Israel, for the judgment of Jehovah, and for the legal cases of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Further, he laid a command upon them, saying, This is how you should do in the fear of Jehovah, with faithfulness and with a complete heart. As for every legal case that will come to you of your brothers who are dwelling in their cities, involving the shedding of blood, involving law and commandment and regulations and judicial decisions, you must warn them that they may not do wrong against Jehovah, and indignation may not have to take place against you and against your brothers. This is how you should do, that you may not incur guilt. And here is Amariah, the chief priest over you, for every matter of Jehovah, and Zebadiah, the son of Ishmael, the leader of the house of Judah, for every matter of the king. And as officers the Levites are available for you. Be strong and act, and let Jehovah prove to be with what is good. Chapter 20. And it came about afterward that the sons of Moab and the sons of Ammon, and with them some of the Ammonim, came against Jehoshaphat in war. So people came and told Jehoshaphat, saying, There has come against you a large crowd from the region of the sea, from Edom, and there they are in Hazazon Tamar, that is to say, in Gedi. At that, Jehoshaphat became afraid, and set his face to search for Jehovah. So he proclaimed a fast for all Judah. Eventually those of Judah were collected together to inquire of Jehovah. Even from all the cities of Judah they came to consult Jehovah. Then Jehoshaphat stood up in the congregation of Judah and of Jerusalem, in the house of Jehovah before the new courtyard, and he proceeded to say, O Jehovah, the God of our forefathers, are you not God in the heavens? And are you not dominating over all the kingdoms of the nations? And are there not in your hand power and mightiness, with no one to hold his ground against you? Did not you yourself, O God of ours, drive away the inhabitants of this land from before your people Israel, and then give it to the seed of Abraham, your lover, to time indefinite? And they took up dwelling in it, and they proceeded to build in it for you a sanctuary for your name, saying, If there should come upon us calamity, sword, adverse judgment, or pestilence, or famine, let us stand before this house and before you, for your name is in this house, that we may call to you for aid out of our distress, and may you hear and save. And now hear the sons of Ammon and Moab, and the mountainous region of Seir, whom you did not allow Israel to invade when they were coming out of the land of Egypt, but they turned away from them, and did not annihilate them. Yes, here they are rewarding us by coming in to drive us out from your possession that you caused us to possess. O our God, will you not execute judgment upon them? For in us there is no power before this large crowd that is coming against us, and we ourselves do not know what we ought to do, but our eyes are toward you. All the while, all those of Judah were standing before Jehovah, even their little ones, their wives, and their sons. Now as for Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, the Levite, of the sons of Asaph, the Spirit of Jehovah came to be upon him in the middle of the congregation. Consequently he said, Pay attention, all Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. Here is what Jehovah has said to you. Do not you be afraid or be terrified because of this large crowd, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow go down against them. There they are coming up by the pass of Ziz, and you will be certain to find them at the end of the torrent valley, in front of the wilderness of Jeruel. You will not need to fight in this instance. Take your position, stand still, and see the salvation of Jehovah in your behalf. O Judah and Jerusalem, do not be afraid or be terrified. Tomorrow go out against them, and Jehovah will be with you. At once Jehoshaphat bowed low with his face to the earth. And all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem themselves fell down before Jehovah to do obeisance to Jehovah. Then the Levites of the sons of the Kohathites and of the sons of the Korahites rose up to praise Jehovah the God of Israel with an extraordinarily loud voice. And they proceeded to rise early in the morning and go out to the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went out, Jehoshaphat stood up and then said, "Hear me, O Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem. Put faith in Jehovah your God, that you may prove yourselves of long duration. Put faith in his prophets, and so prove successful." Further, he took counsel with the people and stationed singers to Jehovah, and those offering praise in holy adornment as they went out ahead of the armed men, and saying, "Give praise to Jehovah, for to time indefinite is his loving kindness." And at the time that they started off with the joyful cry and praise, Jehovah set men in ambush against the sons of Ammon, Moab, and the mountainous region of Seir, who were coming into Judah, and they went smiting one another. And the sons of Ammon and Moab proceeded to stand up against the inhabitants of the mountainous region of Seir, to devote them to destruction and annihilate them. And as soon as they finished with the inhabitants of Seir, they helped each one to bring his own fellow to ruin. But as for Judah, it came to the watchtower of the wilderness. When they turned their faces toward the crowd, why, there they were, their carcasses fallen to the earth without anyone escaping. So Jehoshaphat and his people came to plunder the spoil on them, and they got to find among them in abundance both goods and clothing and desirable articles, and they went stripping them off for themselves until they could carry no more. And it came to be 3 days that they were plundering the spoil, for it was abundant. And on the 4th day they congregated together at the low plain of Berakah, for there they blessed Jehovah. That is why they called the name of that place Low Plain of Berakah, until today. Then all the men of Judah and Jerusalem returned, with Jehoshaphat at their head, to return to Jerusalem with rejoicing, but Jehovah had made them rejoice over their enemies. So they came to Jerusalem with stringed instruments and with harps and with trumpets to the house of Jehovah. And the dread of God came to be upon all the kingdoms of the lands when they heard that Jehovah had fought against the enemies of Israel. Thus the royal realm of Jehoshaphat had no disturbance, and his God continued to give him rest all around. And Jehoshaphat went on reigning over Judah. 35 years old he was when he began to reign, and for 25 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. And he kept walking in the way of his father Asa, and he did not turn aside from it by doing what was right in Jehovah's eyes. Only the high places themselves did not disappear, and the people themselves had not yet prepared their heart for the God of their forefathers. As for the rest of the affairs of Jehoshaphat, the first and the last, there they are written among the words of Jehu, the son of Hanani, which were inserted in the book of the kings of Israel. And after this, Jehoshaphat the king of Judah had partnership with Ahaziah the king of Israel, who acted wickedly. So he made him a partner with himself in making ships to go to Tarshish, and they made ships in Ezion-Geber. However, Eliezer the son of Doravahu of Marisha spoke prophetically against Jehoshaphat, saying, "Inasmuch as you have had partnership with Ahaziah, Jehovah will certainly break down your works." Accordingly, the ships were wrecked, and they did not retain strength to go to Tarshish. Chapter 21. Finally, Jehoshaphat lay down with his forefathers, and was buried with his forefathers in the city of David. And Jehoram his son began to reign in place of him. And he had brothers, Jehoshaphat's sons, Azariah and Jehiel, and Zechariah and Azariah, and Michael and Shephatiah, all these being the sons of Jehoshaphat, the king of Israel. Consequently their father gave them many gifts in silver and in gold, and in choice things, along with fortified cities in Judah. But the kingdom he gave to Jehoram, for he was the firstborn. When Jehoram rose up over the kingdom of his father, he proceeded to make his position strong, and so he killed all his brothers with the sword, and also some of the princes of Israel. 32 years old was Jehoram when he began to reign, and for 8 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And he went on walking in the way of the kings of Israel, just as those of the house of Ahab had done. For Ahab's own daughter had become his wife, and he continued to do what was bad in Jehovah's eyes. And Jehovah did not want to bring the house of David to ruin, for the sake of the covenant that he had concluded with David, and just as he had said he would give him and his sons a lamp always. In his days Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah, and then made a king to reign over them. So Jehoram together with his chiefs passed over, and also all the chariots with him. And it came about that he rose up by night, and went striking down the Edomites that were surrounding him, and also the chiefs of the chariots. But Edom kept up its revolt from under the hand of Judah down to this day. It was then that Libnah began to revolt at the same time from under his hand, because he had left Jehovah the God of his forefathers. He himself also had made high places on the mountains of Judah, that he might cause the inhabitants of Jerusalem to have immoral intercourse, and that he might drive Judah away. Eventually there came a writing to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, "This is what Jehovah the God of David your forefather has said. Due to the fact that you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, or in the ways of Asa the king of Judah, but you walk in the way of the kings of Israel, and cause Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to have immoral intercourse the same way that the house of Ahab caused the having of immoral intercourse, and even your own brothers, the household of your father, who were better than you have killed. Look, Jehovah is dealing a great blow to your people, and to your sons, and to your wives, and to all your goods. And you will be with many sicknesses, with a malady of your intestines, until your intestines have come out, because of the sickness day by day." Accordingly Jehovah aroused against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs that were by the side of the Ethiopians. So they came up into Judah, and forced it open, and took captive all the goods that were to be found in the king's house, and also his sons and his wives. And there was not left to him a son but Jehoahaz, his youngest son. And after all this Jehovah plagued him in his intestines with a sickness, for which there was no healing. And it came about that in the days to come, even when the term of 2 full years had expired, his intestines came out during his sickness, and he gradually died in his bad maladies, and his people did not make a burning for him like the burning for his forefathers. 32 years old he happened to be when he began to reign, and for 8 years he reigned in Jerusalem. Finally he went away without being desired. So they buried him in the city of David, but not in the burial places of the kings. Chapter 22. Then the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah his youngest son king in place of him, for the marauder band that came with the Arabs to the camp had killed all the older ones. And Ahaziah the son of Jehoram began to reign as king of Judah. 22 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and for 1 year he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. He himself also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother herself became his counselor in doing wickedly. And he went on doing what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, the same as the house of Ahab, for they themselves became counselors to him after the death of his father, to his ruination. It was also in their counsel that he walked, so that he went with Jehoram the son of Ahab, the king of Israel, to the war against Hazael, the king of Syria, at Ramoth-Gilead, at which the shooters got to strike Jehoram. Hence he returned to get healed at Jezreel from the wounds that they had inflicted upon him at Ramah, when he fought Hazael the king of Syria. As for Azariah the son of Jehoram the king of Judah, he went down to see Jehoram the son of Ahab in Jezreel, for he was sick. But it was from God that the downfall of Ahaziah occurred by his coming to Jehoram. And when he came, he went out with Jehoram to Jehu, the grandson of Nimshi, whom Jehovah had anointed to cut off the house of Ahab. And it came about that as soon as Jehu had entered into controversy with the house of Ahab, he got to find the princes of Judah and the sons of the brothers of Ahaziah, ministers of Ahaziah, and he proceeded to kill them. Then he went looking for Ahaziah, and they finally captured him, as he was hiding in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. Then they put him to death and buried him, for they said, "He is the grandson of Jehoshaphat, who searched for Jehovah with all his heart." And there was no one of the house of Ahaziah to retain power for the kingdom. As regards Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, she saw that her son had died. So she rose up and destroyed all the royal offspring of the house of Judah. However, Jehoshabeath, the daughter of the king, took Jehoash the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the sons of the king that were to be put to death, and put him and his nursing woman in the inner room for the couches. And Jehoshabeath, the daughter of King Jehoram, the wife of Jehoiada the priest, for she herself happened to be the sister of Ahaziah, kept him concealed because of Athaliah, and she did not put him to death. And he continued with them in the house of the true God, hidden for 6 years, while Athaliah was ruling as queen over the land. Chapter 23. And in the 7th year Jehoiada showed himself courageous, and proceeded to take the chiefs of hundreds, namely Azariah the son of Jeroham, and Ishmael the son of Jehohanan, and Azariah the son of Obed, and Maaseiah the son of Adiah, and Elishaphat the son of Zichri with him into the covenant. Afterward they went around throughout Judah, and collected together the Levites from all the cities of Judah, and the heads of the paternal houses of Israel. So they came to Jerusalem. Then all the congregation concluded a covenant with the king in the house of the true God, after which he said to them, "Look, the son of the king himself will reign, just as Jehovah promised concerning the sons of David. This is the thing that you will do. 1/3 of you who are coming in on the Sabbath, of the priests and of the Levites, will be for doorkeepers. And 1/3 will be at the house of the king, and 1/3 will be at the gate of the foundation. And all the people will be in the courtyards of the house of Jehovah. And do not let anyone enter the house of Jehovah but the priests and those of the Levites ministering. These are the ones that will enter, because they are a holy group, and all the people themselves will keep the obligation to Jehovah. And the Levites must encircle the king all around, each one with his weapons in his hands. And as for anyone coming into the house, he should be put to death. And continue with the king when he comes in and when he goes out." And the Levites and all Judah proceeded to do according to all that Jehoiada the priest had commanded. So they took each one his men that were coming in on the Sabbath, together with those going out on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the priest had not set the divisions free from duty. Further, Jehoiada the priest gave the chiefs of hundreds the spears and the shields and the circular shields that had belonged to King David, which were in the house of the true God. And he went on to station all the people, even each one with his missile in his hand, from the right side of the house clear to the left side of the house, by the altar and by the house, all around near the king. Then they brought the king's son out, and put upon him the diadem, and the testimony, and made him king. And so Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and said, "Let the king live." When Athaliah heard the sound of the people running and praising the king, she at once came to the people at the house of Jehovah. Then she saw, and there was the king standing by his pillar at the entry, and the princes and the trumpets by the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing the trumpets, and the singers with the instruments of song, and those giving the signal for offering praise. Immediately Athaliah ripped her garments apart and said, "Conspiracy! Conspiracy!" But Jehoiada the priest brought out the chiefs of hundreds, the appointed ones of the military force, and said to them, "Take her out from inside the rows, and as for anyone coming after her, he should be put to death with the sword." For the priest had said, "You must not put her to death at the house of Jehovah." So they laid their hands upon her. When she came to the entry of the horse gate of the king's house, they at once put her to death there. Then Jehoiada concluded a covenant between himself and all the people and the king, that they would continue as the people of Jehovah. After that, all the people came to the house of Baal and pulled it down, and his altars and his images they broke up, and Mattan, the priest of Baal, they killed before the altars. Further, Jehoiada put the offices of the house of Jehovah in the hand of the priests and the Levites, whom David had put in divisions over the house of Jehovah, to offer up the burnt sacrifices of Jehovah according to what is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with song by the hands of David. So he stationed the gatekeepers by the gates of the house of Jehovah, that no one unclean in any respect might enter. He now took the chiefs of hundreds, and the lordly ones, and the rulers over the people, and all the people of the land, and brought the king down from the house of Jehovah. Then they came right through the upper gate to the king's house, and seated the king upon the throne of the kingdom. And all the people of the land continued to rejoice. And the city itself had no disturbance, and Athaliah they had put to death with the sword. Chapter 24. 7 years old was Jehoash when he began to reign, and for 40 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zibiah from Beersheba. And Jehoash kept doing what was right in Jehovah's eyes all the days of Jehoiada the priest. And Jehoiada proceeded to get 2 wives for him, and he came to be father to sons and daughters. Now it occurred afterward that it became close to the heart of Jehoash to renovate the house of Jehovah. Accordingly, he collected the priests and the Levites together and said to them, "Go out to the cities of Judah and collect money from all Israel to repair the house of your God from year to year, and you for your part should act quickly in the matter." And the Levites did not act quickly. So the king called Jehoiada the head and said to him, "Why is it that you have not required an account of the Levites for bringing in from Judah and Jerusalem the sacred tax ordered by Moses the servant of Jehovah, even that of the congregation of Israel, for the tent of the testimony? For as regards Athaliah the wicked woman, her sons themselves had broken into the house of the true God, and even all the holy things of the house of Jehovah they had rendered up to the Baals." Then the king said the word, and so they made a chest, and put it outside at the gate of the house of Jehovah. After that they issued a call throughout Judah and Jerusalem, to bring to Jehovah the sacred tax ordered by Moses the servant of the true God upon Israel in the wilderness. And all the princes and all the people began to rejoice, and they kept bringing and casting it into the chest until they all had given. And it came about at the proper time, he would bring the chest to the care of the king by the hand of the Levites. And as soon as they saw that there was plenty of money, the secretary of the king and the commissioner of the chief priest came, and then emptied the chest, and lifted it up, and returned it to its place. That was the way they did from day to day, so that they gathered money in abundance. Then the king and Jehoiada would give it to the doers of the work of the service of Jehovah's house. And they came to be hirers of the stone-cutters and of the craftsmen for renovating Jehovah's house, and also of the workers in iron and copper for repairing Jehovah's house. And the doers of the work began operations, and the repair work kept advancing by their hand. And finally they made the house of the true God stand as it structurally should, and made it strong. And as soon as they had finished, they brought before the king and Jehoiada the rest of the money, and they proceeded to make utensils for the house of Jehovah, utensils for the ministry and for making offerings, and cups and utensils of gold and of silver. And they came to be offerers of burnt sacrifices in the house of Jehovah constantly, all the days of Jehoiada. And Jehoiada got to be old, and satisfied with years, and gradually died, being 130 years old at his death. So they buried him in the city of David along with the kings, because he had done good in Israel, and with the true God in his house. And after Jehoiada's death, the princes of Judah came in and proceeded to bow down to the king. At that time the king listened to them, and gradually they left the house of Jehovah, the God of their forefathers, and began serving the sacred poles and the idols, so that there came to be indignation against Judah and Jerusalem because of this guilt of theirs. And he kept sending prophets among them to bring them back to Jehovah, and they kept bearing witness against them, but they did not give ear. And God's Spirit itself enveloped Zechariah the son of Jehoiada the priest, so that he stood up above the people and said to them, "This is what the true God has said. Why are you overstepping the commandments of Jehovah, so that you cannot prove successful? Because you have left Jehovah, he will in turn leave you." Finally they conspired against him, and pelted him with stones at the king's commandment in the courtyard of Jehovah's house. And Jehoash the king did not remember the loving kindness that Jehoiada his father had exercised toward him, so that he killed his son, who, when he was at the point of dying, said, "Let Jehovah see to it, and ask it back." And it came about at the turn of the year, a military force of Syria came up against him, and they began to invade Judah and Jerusalem. Then they brought all the princes of the people to ruin from among the people, and all their spoil they sent to the king of Damascus. For it was with a small number of men that the military force of the Syrians made an invasion, and Jehovah himself gave into their hand a military force of very great number, because they had left Jehovah the God of their forefathers. And upon Jehoash they executed acts of judgment. And when they went away from him, for they left him with many diseases, his own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the sons of Jehoiada the priest, and they got to kill him upon his own couch, so that he died. Then they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the burial places of the kings. And these were the conspirators against him: Zabad the son of Shimeath the Ammonitess, and Jehozabad the son of Shimrith the Moabitess. As for his sons, and the abundance of the pronouncement against him, and the founding of the house of the true God, there they are written in the exposition of the book of the Kings. And Amaziah his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 25. At the age of 25 years, Amaziah became king, and for 29 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jehoaddan of Jerusalem. And he continued to do what was right in Jehovah's eyes, only not with a complete heart. And it came about that as soon as the kingdom had become strong upon him, he promptly killed his servants who had struck down the king his father. And their sons he did not put to death, but did according to what is written in the law, in the book of Moses, that Jehovah commanded, saying, Fathers should not die for sons, neither should sons themselves die for fathers, but it is each one for his own sin that they should die. And Amaziah proceeded to collect Judah together, and to have them stand according to the house of the forefathers, by the chiefs of thousands and by the chiefs of hundreds, for all Judah and Benjamin. And he went on to register them from 20 years of age upward, and finally he found them to be 300,000 choice men going out to the army, handling lance and large shield. Further, he hired from Israel 100,000 valiant mighty men for 100 silver talents. And a certain man of the true God came to him, saying, O king, do not let the army of Israel come with you, for Jehovah is not with Israel, that is, all the sons of Ephraim. But come you yourself, act, be courageous for the war. The true God could cause you to stumble before an enemy, for there exists power with God to help and to cause stumbling. At this Amaziah said to the man of the true God, But what is there to do about the 100 talents that I have given to the troops of Israel? To this the man of the true God said, There exists with Jehovah the means to give you much more than this. Accordingly Amaziah separated them, namely the troops that had come to him from Ephraim, to go to their own place. However, their anger got very hot against Judah, so that they returned to their own place in the heat of anger. And Amaziah, for his part, took courage, and proceeded to lead his own people and go to the valley of Salt. And he went striking down the sons of Seir, 10,000 of them. And there were 10,000 that the sons of Judah captured alive. So they brought them to the top of the crag, and proceeded to throw them from the top of the crag, and they, one and all, burst apart. As for the members of the troop whom Amaziah had sent back from going with him to the war, they began making raids upon the cities of Judah, from Samaria clear to Beth-horon, and went striking down 3,000 of them, and taking a great plunder. But it occurred after Amaziah came from striking down the Edomites, that he now brought the gods of the sons of Seir, and set them up for himself as gods. And before them he began to bow down, and to them he began to make sacrificial smoke. Consequently Jehovah's anger became hot against Amaziah, and so he sent a prophet to him and said to him, Why have you searched for the people's gods that did not deliver their own people out of your hand? And it came about, when he spoke to him, that the king immediately said to him, Was it a counselor of the king that we constituted you? Quit for your own sake. Why should they strike you down? Accordingly the prophet quit. But he said, I certainly know that God has resolved to bring you to ruin, because you have done this, and you have not listened to my counsel. Then Amaziah the king of Judah took counsel, and sent to Jehoash the son of Jehoahaz the son of Jehu, the king of Israel, saying, Come, let us look each other in the face. At that Jehoash the king of Israel sent to Amaziah the king of Judah, saying, The thorny weed itself that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, Do give your daughter to my son as a wife. However, a wild beast of the field that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thorny weed down. You have said to yourself, Here you have struck down Edom, and your heart has lifted you up to be glorified. Now do keep dwelling in your own house. Why should you engage in strife in a bad position and have to fall, you and Judah with you? But Amaziah did not listen, for it was from the true God for the purpose of giving them into his hand, because they had searched for the gods of Edom. So Jehoash the king of Israel went up, and they proceeded to look each other in the face, he and Amaziah the king of Judah, at Beth-shemesh, which belongs to Judah. And Judah came to be defeated before Israel, so that they took to flight, each one to his tent. And it was Amaziah the king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, that Jehoash the king of Israel seized at Beth-shemesh, after which he brought him to Jerusalem, and made a breach in the wall of Jerusalem, from the gate of Ephraim clear to the corner gate, 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and the silver, and all the articles that were to be found in the house of the true God, with Obed-Edom, and the treasures of the king's house, and the hostages, and then returned to Samaria. And Amaziah the son of Jehoash, the king of Judah, continued to live after the death of Jehoash the son of Jehoahaz, the king of Israel, 15 years. As for the rest of the affairs of Amaziah, the first and the last, look, are they not written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel? And from the time that Amaziah turned aside from following Jehovah, they proceeded to form a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem. At length he fled to Lachish, but they sent after him to Lachish and put him to death there. So they carried him upon horses, and buried him with his forefathers in the city of Judah. Chapter 26. Then all the people of Judah took Uzziah, he being 16 years old, and they made him king in place of his father Amaziah. He it was that rebuilt Eloth, and then restored it to Judah after the king had lain down with his forefathers. 16 years old was Uzziah when he began to reign, and for 52 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. And he kept doing what was right in Jehovah's eyes, according to all that Amaziah his father had done. And he continually tended to search for God in the days of Zechariah, the instructor in the fear of the true God. And in the days of his searching for Jehovah, the true God made him prosperous. And he proceeded to go out and fight against the Philistines, and break through the wall of Gath, and the wall of Jabneh, and the wall of Ashdod, after which he built cities in Ashdod territory, and among the Philistines. And the true God continued to help him against the Philistines and against the Arabians that were dwelling in Gur-baal and the Meunim. And the Ammonites began to give tribute to Uzziah. Eventually his fame went even as far as Egypt, for he displayed strength to an extraordinary degree. Moreover, Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem by the corner gate and by the valley gate, and by the buttress, and made them strong. Further, he built towers in the wilderness, and hewed out many cisterns, for there was a great deal of livestock that became his, and also in the Shephelah and on the tableland. There were farmers and vine dressers in the mountains and in Carmel, for a lover of agriculture he proved to be. Moreover, Uzziah came to have a force engaging in war, those going out on military service in troops, by the number of their registration by the hand of Jael, the secretary, and Maaseiah, the officer under the control of Hananiah of the king's princes. The entire number of the heads of the paternal houses of the valiant mighty men was 2,600. And under their control the army forces were 307,500 men, engaging in war with the power of a military force to help the king against the enemy. And Uzziah continued to prepare for them, for the entire army, shields and lances and helmets, and coats of mail and bows and sling stones. Further, he made in Jerusalem engines of war, the invention of engineers, that they might come to be upon the towers and upon the corners, to shoot arrows and great stones. Consequently his fame went out to a great distance, for he was helped wonderfully until he was strong. However, as soon as he was strong, his heart became haughty, even to the point of causing ruin, so that he acted unfaithfully against Jehovah his God, and came into the temple of Jehovah to burn incense upon the altar of incense. Immediately Azariah the priest, and with him priests of Jehovah, 80 valiant men, came in after him. Then they stood up against Uzziah the king, and said to him, It is not your business, O Uzziah, to burn incense to Jehovah, but it is the business of the priests, the sons of Aaron, the ones sanctified, to burn incense. Go out from the sanctuary, for you have acted unfaithfully, and it is not for any glory to you on the part of Jehovah God. But Uzziah became enraged, while in his hand there was a censer for burning incense. And during his rage against the priests, leprosy itself flashed up in his forehead, before the priests in the house of Jehovah, beside the altar of incense. When Azariah the chief priest and all the priests turned toward him, why, there he was, stricken with leprosy in his forehead. So they excitedly began to remove him from there, and he himself also hastened to go out, because Jehovah had smitten him. And Uzziah the king continued to be a leper until the day of his death, and he kept dwelling in a house exempt from duties, as a leper, for he had been severed from the house of Jehovah, while Jotham his son was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. And the rest of the affairs of Uzziah, the first and the last, Isaiah the son of Amoz the prophet has written. Finally Uzziah lay down with his forefathers, and so they buried him with his forefathers, but in the burial field that belonged to the kings, for they said, He is a leper. And Jotham his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 27. 25 years old was Jotham when he began to reign, and for 16 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. And he kept doing what was right in Jehovah's eyes, according to all that Uzziah his father had done. Only he did not invade the temple of Jehovah. However, the people were yet acting ruinously. He himself built the upper gate of Jehovah's house, and on the wall of Ophel he did a great deal of building. And cities he built in the mountainous region of Judah, and in the woodlands he built fortified places and towers. And he himself warred against the king of the sons of Ammon, and eventually proved stronger than they were, so that the sons of Ammon gave him in that year 100 silver talents, and 10,000 core measures of wheat, and 10,000 of barley. This was what the sons of Ammon paid to him, also in the 2nd year and the 3rd. So Jotham kept strengthening himself, for he prepared his ways before Jehovah his God. As for the rest of the affairs of Jotham, and all his wars and his ways, there they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and of Judah. 25 years old he happened to be when he began to reign, and for 16 years he reigned in Jerusalem. Finally, Jotham lay down with his forefathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Ahaz his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 28. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and for 16 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in Jehovah's eyes, like David his forefather. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and even molten statues he made of the Baals. And he himself made sacrificial smoke in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and proceeded to burn up his sons in the fire, according to the detestable things of the nations that Jehovah had driven out from before the sons of Israel. And he regularly sacrificed and made sacrificial smoke on the high places, and upon the hills, and under every sort of luxuriant tree. Consequently Jehovah his God gave him into the hand of the king of Syria, so that they struck him and carried off from him a great number of captives, and brought them to Damascus. And also into the hand of the king of Israel he was given, so that he struck him with a great slaughter. Accordingly Pekah the son of Remaliah killed in Judah 120,000 in one day, all valiant men, because of their leaving Jehovah the God of their forefathers. Further, Zichri, a mighty man of Ephraim, killed Maaseiah the son of the king, and Azrikam the leader of the household, and Elkanah the one next to the king. Moreover, the sons of Israel took 200,000 of their brothers captive, women, sons, and daughters, and also a great deal of spoil they took from them as plunder, after which they brought the spoil to Samaria. And there happened to be a prophet of Jehovah there, whose name was Oded. So he went out before the army that was coming to Samaria, and said to them, Look, it was because of the rage of Jehovah the God of your forefathers against Judah that he gave them into your hand, so that you did a killing among them with a raging that has reached clear to the heavens. And now the sons of Judah and of Jerusalem you are thinking of reducing to men servants and maidservants for yourselves. Nevertheless, are there not with you yourselves cases of guilt against Jehovah your God? And now listen to me, and return the captives that you have captured from your brothers, for Jehovah's burning anger is against you. At that, certain men of the heads of the sons of Ephraim, Azariah, the son of Jehohanan, Berechiah, the son of Meshillemoth, and Jehizkiah, the son of Shallum, and Amasa, the son of Hadlai, rose up against those coming in from the military campaign, and they said to them, You must not bring in the captives here, for it will result in guilt against Jehovah on our part. You are thinking of adding to our sins and to our guilt, for abundant is the guilt we have, and there is burning anger against Israel. Accordingly the armed men left the captives and the plunder before the princes and all the congregation. Then the men that were designated by their names rose up, and took hold of the captives, and all their naked ones they clothed from the spoil. So they clothed them, and furnished them with sandals, and fed them, and gave them drink, and greased them. Furthermore, in the case of anyone tottering, they gave them transportation on the asses, and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, beside their brothers. After that they returned to Samaria. At that time King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for them to help him. And once again the Edomites themselves came in and went striking down Judah and carrying off captives. As for the Philistines, they made a raid upon the cities of the Shephelah and the Negeb of Judah, and got to capture Beth-shemesh and Aijalon, and Gederoth and Soko and its dependent towns, and Timnah and its dependent towns, and Gimzo and its dependent towns. And they took up dwelling there. For Jehovah humbled Judah on account of Ahaz the king of Israel, because he let unrestraint grow in Judah, and there was an acting with great unfaithfulness toward Jehovah. Eventually, Tilgath-Pilneser, the king of Assyria, came against him, and caused him distress, and did not strengthen him. For Ahaz stripped the house of Jehovah and the house of the king and of the princes, and thus made a gift to the king of Assyria. But he was of no assistance to him. However, at the time that he was causing him distress, he acted unfaithfully still more toward Jehovah, that is, King Ahaz did. And he began to sacrifice to the gods of Damascus that were striking him, and he went on to say, Because the gods of the kings of Syria are helping them, to them I shall sacrifice, that they may help me. And they themselves became to him a cause for making him and all Israel stumble. Furthermore, Ahaz gathered together the utensils of the house of the true God, and cut to pieces the utensils of the house of the true God, and closed the doors of the house of Jehovah, and made altars for himself at every corner in Jerusalem. And in all cities, even the cities of Judah, he made high places for making sacrificial smoke to other gods, so that he offended Jehovah the God of his forefathers. As for the rest of his affairs and all his ways, the first and the last, there they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and of Israel. Finally, Ahaz lay down with his forefathers, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, for they did not bring him into the burial places of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 29. Hezekiah himself became king at the age of 25 years, and for 29 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. And he kept doing what was right in Jehovah's eyes, according to all that David his forefather had done. He himself, in the first year of his reigning, in the first month, opened the doors of the house of Jehovah, and began to repair them. Then he brought the priests and the Levites, and gathered them to the open place to the east. And he proceeded to say to them, Listen to me, you Levites. Now sanctify yourselves, and sanctify the house of Jehovah the God of your forefathers, and bring the impure thing out from the holy place. For our fathers have acted unfaithfully, and have done what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah our God, so that they left him, and turned around their face away from the tabernacle of Jehovah, and offered the back of the neck. They also closed the doors of the porch, and kept the lamps extinguished, and incense they did not burn, and burnt sacrifice they did not offer up in the holy place to the God of Israel. And Jehovah's indignation came to be against Judah and Jerusalem, so that he constituted them an object at which to quake, an object of astonishment, and a cause for whistling, just as you are seeing with your own eyes. And here our forefathers fell by the sword, and our sons and our daughters and our wives were in captivity for this. Now it is close to my heart to conclude a covenant with Jehovah the God of Israel, that his burning anger may turn back from us. Now, my sons, do not give yourselves up to rest, for you are the ones whom Jehovah has chosen to stand before him, to minister to him, and to continue as his ministers and makers of sacrificial smoke. At that the Levites rose up, Mahath the son of Amasai, and Joel the son of Azariah, of the sons of the Kohathites, and from the sons of Merari, Kish, the son of Abdi, and Azariah the son of Jehalalel. And from the Gershonites, Joah the son of Zimmah, and Eden the son of Joah. And from the sons of Elizaphan, Shimri, and Jeuel. And from the sons of Asaph, Zechariah and Mattaniah. And from the sons of Heman, Jehiel and Shimei. And from the sons of Jeduthun, Shemaiah and Uzziel. Then they gathered their brothers together, and sanctified themselves, and came according to the king's commandment in the words of Jehovah, to cleanse the house of Jehovah. The priests now came inside the house of Jehovah to do the cleansing, and brought out all the uncleanness that they found in the temple of Jehovah to the courtyard of the house of Jehovah. In turn, the Levites received it to take it out to the torrent valley of Kidron outside. Thus they got started on the first day of the first month at sanctifying, and on the 8th day of the month they came to the porch of Jehovah, so that they sanctified the house of Jehovah in 8 days, and on the 16th day of the first month they finished. After that they came inside to Hezekiah the king and said, We have cleansed the whole house of Jehovah, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and the table of the layer bread and all its utensils. And all the utensils that King Ahaz removed from employment during his reign, in his unfaithfulness, we have prepared, and have sanctified them, and there they are before the altar of Jehovah. And Hezekiah the king proceeded to get up early, and gather the princes of the city together, and go up to the house of Jehovah. And they came bringing 7 bulls and 7 rams and 7 male lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, and for the sanctuary, and for Judah. So he said to the sons of Aaron the priests to offer them up upon the altar of Jehovah. Accordingly they slaughtered the cattle, and the priests received the blood and sprinkled it upon the altar. After which they slaughtered the rams, and sprinkled the blood upon the altar. And they slaughtered the male lambs, and sprinkled the blood upon the altar. Then they brought the male goats of the sin offering near before the king and the congregation, and laid their hands upon them. The priests now slaughtered them, and made a sin offering with their blood upon the altar, to make atonement for all Israel, because it was for all Israel that the king said the burnt offering and the sin offering should be. Meantime, he had the Levites stationed at the house of Jehovah with cymbals, with stringed instruments, and with harps, by the commandment of David and of Gad the king's visionary, and of Nathan the prophet, for it was by the hand of Jehovah that the commandment was by means of his prophets. So the Levites kept standing with the instruments of David, and also the priests with the trumpets. Then Hezekiah said to offer up the burnt sacrifice on the altar. And at the time that the burnt offering started, the song of Jehovah started, and also the trumpets, even under the direction of the instruments of David the king of Israel. And all the congregation were bowing down while the song was resounding, and the trumpets were blaring, all this until the burnt offering was finished. And as soon as they finished offering it up, the king and all those found with him bowed low and prostrated themselves. Hezekiah the king and the princes now said to the Levites to praise Jehovah in the words of David and of Asaph the visionary. So they began to offer praise even with rejoicing, and they kept bending down and prostrating themselves. Finally Hezekiah answered and said, Now you have filled your hand with power for Jehovah. Approach, and bring sacrifices and thanksgiving sacrifices to the house of Jehovah. And the congregation began to bring sacrifices and thanksgiving sacrifices, and also everyone willing of heart burnt offerings. And the number of the burnt offerings that the congregation brought came to be 70 cattle, 100 rams, 200 male lambs, all these as a burnt offering to Jehovah. And also the holy offerings, 600 cattle and 3,000 of the flock. Only the priests themselves happened to be too few, and they were not able to skin all the burnt offerings. So their brothers the Levites helped them out until the work was finished, and until the priests could sanctify themselves, for the Levites were more upright of heart for sanctifying themselves than the priests. And 2, the burnt offerings were in great quantity with the fat pieces of the communion sacrifices and with the drink offerings for the burnt offerings. Thus the service of the house of Jehovah was prepared. Consequently Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over the fact that the true God had made preparation for the people, because it was all of a sudden that the thing had occurred. Chapter 30. And Hezekiah proceeded to send to all Israel and Judah, and even letters he wrote to Ephraim and Manasseh, to come to the house of Jehovah in Jerusalem to hold the Passover to Jehovah the God of Israel. However, the king and his princes and all the congregation in Jerusalem resolved to hold the Passover in the 2nd month. They had not been able to hold it at that time because not enough priests on the one hand had sanctified themselves, and the people on the other hand had not gathered themselves to Jerusalem. And the thing was right in the eyes of the king and in the eyes of all the congregation. So they decided to have the call pass through all Israel from Beersheba to Dan, to come and hold the Passover to Jehovah the God of Israel at Jerusalem. For it was not as a multitude that they had done so according to what is written. Accordingly, the runners with the letters from the hand of the king and of his princes went throughout all Israel and Judah, even according to the commandment of the king, saying, You sons of Israel, return to Jehovah the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to the escaped ones that are left of you out of the palm of the kings of Assyria. And do not become like your forefathers and like your brothers that acted unfaithfully toward Jehovah the God of their forefathers, so that he constituted them an object of astonishment, just as you are seeing. Now do not stiffen your neck as your forefathers did. Give place to Jehovah, and come to his sanctuary that he has sanctified to time indefinite, and serve Jehovah your God, that his burning anger may turn back from you. For when you return to Jehovah, your brothers and your sons will be objects of mercy before those holding them captive, and be allowed to return to this land. For Jehovah your God is gracious and merciful, and he will not turn away the face from you if you return to him." So the runners continued on, passing along from city to city throughout the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, even to Zebulun. But they were continually speaking in mockery of them and deriding them. Only individuals from Asher and Manasseh and from Zebulun humbled themselves so that they came to Jerusalem. The hand of the true God proved to be also in Judah, to give them one heart to perform the commandment of the king and the princes in the matter of Jehovah. And they proceeded to gather themselves together at Jerusalem, a numerous people, to hold the festival of the unfermented cakes in the 2nd month, a congregation very multitudinous. Then they rose up and removed the altars that were in Jerusalem, and all the incense altars they removed, and then threw them into the torrent valley of Kidron. After that, they slaughtered the Passover victim on the 14th day of the 2nd month, and the priests and the Levites themselves had been humiliated, so that they sanctified themselves and brought burnt offerings to the house of Jehovah. And they kept standing at their place according to their rule, according to the law of Moses, the man of the true God, the priests sprinkling the blood received from the hand of the Levites. For there were many in the congregation that had not sanctified themselves, and the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover victims for all that were not clean, to sanctify them to Jehovah. For there was a great number of the people, many from Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun, that had not cleansed themselves. For they did not eat the Passover according to what is written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "May the good Jehovah himself make allowance for every one that has prepared his heart to search for the true God Jehovah, the God of his forefathers, though without the purification for what is holy." Accordingly Jehovah listened to Hezekiah and healed the people. So the sons of Israel that were found in Jerusalem held the festival of the unfermented cakes 7 days with great rejoicing. And the Levites and the priests were offering praise to Jehovah day by day with loud instruments, even to Jehovah. Moreover, Hezekiah spoke to the heart of all the Levites who were acting with fine discretion toward Jehovah, and they proceeded to eat the appointed feast for 7 days, sacrificing communion sacrifices and making confession to Jehovah the God of their forefathers. Then all the congregation decided to hold it for 7 more days, and so they held it for 7 days with rejoicing. For Hezekiah the king of Judah himself contributed for the congregation 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep, and the princes themselves contributed for the congregation 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep, and priests kept sanctifying themselves in great number. And all the congregation of Judah, and the priests and the Levites, and all the congregation that came from Israel, and the alien residents that came from the land of Israel, and those dwelling in Judah, continued rejoicing. And there came to be great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for from the days of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, there was none like this in Jerusalem. Finally, the priests, the Levites, stood up and blessed the people, and a hearing was granted to their voice, so that their prayer came to his holy dwelling, the heavens. Chapter 31. And as soon as they finished all this, all the Israelites that were found there went out to the cities of Judah, and they proceeded to break up the sacred pillars, and cut down the sacred poles, and pull down the high places and the altars out of all Judah and Benjamin, and in Ephraim and Manasseh, until they had finished. After which all the sons of Israel returned to their cities, each one to his own possession. Then Hezekiah set the divisions of the priests and of the Levites in their divisions, each one in accordance with its service for the priests and for the Levites, as regards the burnt offering and the communion sacrifices, to minister and to give thanks and praise in the gates of the camps of Jehovah. And there was a portion of the king from his own goods for the burnt offerings of the morning and the evening, and also the burnt offerings for the Sabbaths, and for the new moons, and for the festival seasons, according to what is written in the law of Jehovah. Furthermore, he said to the people, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to give the portion of the priests and of the Levites, in order that they might adhere strictly to the law of Jehovah. And as soon as the word broke forth, the sons of Israel increased the firstfruits of the grain, new wine, and oil and honey, and all the produce of the field, and the tenth of everything they brought in abundantly. And the sons of Israel and of Judah that were dwelling in the cities of Judah, even they themselves brought in the tenth of cattle and sheep, and the tenth of the holy things, the things sanctified to Jehovah their God. They brought in and so gave heaps upon heaps. In the 3rd month they started the heaps by laying the lowest layer, and in the 7th month they finished. When Hezekiah and the princes came and saw the heaps, they proceeded to bless Jehovah and his people Israel. In time Hezekiah inquired of the priests and the Levites concerning the heaps. Then Azariah, the chief priest of the house of Zadok, said to him, Yes, he said, from the time they started to bring the contribution into the house of Jehovah, there has been an eating and getting satisfied, and having a surplus in abundance. For Jehovah himself has blessed his people, and what has been left over is this great plenty. At this Hezekiah said to prepare dining rooms in the house of Jehovah. Accordingly, they prepared them. And they kept bringing in the contribution and the tenth and the holy things in faithfulness. And Conaniah the Levite was in charge of them as leader, and Shimei his brother was second, and Jehiel and Azaziah, and Nahath and Asahel, and Jerimoth and Jozabad, and Eliel, and Ismachiah, and Mahath and Benaiah were commissioners at the side of Conaniah, and Shimei his brother, by the order of Hezekiah the king. And Azariah was the leading one of the house of the true God. And Korah the son of Imnah the Levite was the gatekeeper to the east, in charge of the voluntary offerings of the true God, to give Jehovah's contribution and the most holy things. And under his control there were Eden and Meniamin, and Jeshua and Shemaiah, Amariah and Shechaniah, in the cities of the priests, in office of trust, to give to their brothers in the divisions equally, to great and small. Apart from their genealogical enrollment of the males from 3 years of age upward, of all those coming to the house of Jehovah as a daily matter of course, for their service by their obligations according to their divisions. This is the genealogical enrollment of the priests by the house of their fathers, and also of the Levites, from the age of 20 years upward, by their obligations in their divisions, both for the genealogical enrollment among all their little ones, their wives and their sons and their daughters, for all the congregation, because in their office of trust they proceeded to sanctify themselves for what was holy, and for the sons of Aaron, the priests, in the fields of pasture ground of their cities. In all the different cities there were men that had been designated by their names, to give portions to every male among the priests, and to the entire genealogical enrollment among the Levites. And Hezekiah proceeded to do like this in all Judah, and he continued to do what was good and right and faithful before Jehovah his God. And in every work that he started in the service of the house of the true God, and in the law and in the commandment to search for his God, it was with all his heart that he acted, and he proved successful. Chapter 32. After these things, and this faithful course, Sennacherib the king of Assyria came, and proceeded to invade Judah and camp against the fortified cities, and kept thinking of making them his by a breakthrough. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come with his face set for war against Jerusalem, then he decided with his princes and his mighty men to stop up the waters of the springs that were outside the city, and so they helped him. Accordingly, many people were collected together, And they went stopping up all the fountains and the torrent that floods through the middle of the land, saying, Why should the kings of Assyria come and actually find a great deal of water? Furthermore, he took courage, and built up all the broken-down wall and raised towers upon it, and on the outside another wall, and repaired the mound of the city of David, and made missiles in abundance and shields. And he proceeded to put military chiefs over the people, and collect them to him at the public square of the gate of the city, and speak to the heart of them, saying, Be courageous and strong. Do not be afraid, nor be terrified because of the king of Assyria, and on account of all the crowd that is with him. For with us there are more than there are with him. With him there is an arm of flesh, but with us there is Jehovah our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people began to brace themselves upon the words of Hezekiah the king of Judah. It was after this that Sennacherib the king of Assyria sent his servants to Jerusalem, while he was at Lachish and all his imperial might with him, to Hezekiah the king of Judah, and to all the Judeans that were in Jerusalem, saying, This is what Sennacherib the king of Assyria has said. In what is it that you are trusting, while sitting quiet under siege in Jerusalem? Is not Hezekiah luring you so as to give you over to die by famine and by thirst, saying, Jehovah our God himself will deliver us out of the palm of the king of Assyria? Is it not Hezekiah himself that removed his high places and his altars, and then said to Judah and to Jerusalem, Before one altar you should bow, and upon it you should make sacrificial smoke? Do you not know what I myself and my forefathers did to all the peoples of the lands? Did the gods of the nations of the lands at all prove able to deliver their land out of my hand? Who was there among all the gods of these nations that my forefathers devoted to destruction, that proved able to deliver his people out of my hand, so that your God should be able to deliver you out of my hand? And now do not let Hezekiah deceive you or allure you like this, and do not put faith in him, for no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people out of my hand and out of the hand of my forefathers. How much less, then, will your own God deliver you out of my hand? And his servant spoke yet further against Jehovah the true God, and against Hezekiah his servant. Even letters he wrote to reproach Jehovah the God of Israel, and to talk against him, saying, Like the gods of the nations of the lands, who did not deliver their people out of my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not deliver his people out of my hand. And they kept calling with a loud voice in the Jews' language to the people of Jerusalem that were upon the wall, to make them afraid and to disturb them, in order that they might capture the city. And they went on speaking against the God of Jerusalem the same way as against the gods of the peoples of the earth, the work of man's hands. But Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the son of Amoz the prophet kept praying over this, and crying to the heavens for aid. And Jehovah proceeded to send an angel, and efface every valiant, mighty man, and leader, and chief in the camp of the king of Assyria, so that he went back with shame of face to his own land. Later on he entered the house of his God, and there certain ones that had come out of his own inward parts felled him with the sword. Thus Jehovah saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem out of the hand of Sennacherib the king of Assyria, and out of the hand of all others, and gave them rest all around. And there were many bringing gifts to Jehovah at Jerusalem, and choice things to Hezekiah the king of Judah. And he came to be exalted in the eyes of all the nations after that. In those days Hezekiah fell sick to the point of dying, and he began to pray to Jehovah. So he talked to him, and a portent he gave him. But according to the benefit rendered him, Hezekiah made no return, for his heart became haughty, and there came to be indignation against him, and against Judah and Jerusalem. However, Hezekiah humbled himself for the haughtiness of his heart, he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and Jehovah's indignation did not come upon them in the days of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah came to have riches and glory to a very great amount. And storehouses he made for himself for silver and for gold, and for precious stones, and for balsam oil, and for shields, and for all the desirable articles, and also storage places for the produce of grain, and new wine, and oil, and also stalls for all the different sorts of beasts, and stalls for the droves. And cities he acquired for himself, and also livestock of the flock and of the herd in abundance. For God gave him very many goods. And Hezekiah was the one that stopped up the upper source of the waters of Gihon, and kept them directed straight along down to the west to the city of David. And Hezekiah continued to prove successful in every work of his. And thus it was, that by the spokesmen of the princes of Babylon that were sent to him to inquire about the portent that had happened in the land, the true God left him to put him to the test, to get to know everything in his heart. As for the rest of the affairs of Hezekiah and his acts of loving kindness, there they are written in the vision of Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Finally, Hezekiah lay down with his forefathers, and they buried him in the ascent to the burial places of the sons of David. And honor was what all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem rendered to him at his death. And Manasseh his son began to reign in place of him. Chapter 33. 12 years old was Manasseh when he began to reign, and for 55 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And he proceeded to do what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, according to the detestable things of the nations that Jehovah had driven out from before the sons of Israel. So he built again the high places that Hezekiah his father had pulled down, and set up altars to the Baals, and made sacred poles. And he began to bow down to all the army of the heavens and serve them. And he built altars in the house of Jehovah, respecting which Jehovah had said, In Jerusalem my name will prove to be to time indefinite. And he went on to build altars to all the army of the heavens in 2 courtyards of the house of Jehovah. And he himself made his own sons pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and practiced magic, and used divination, and practiced sorcery, and made spiritistic mediums, and professional foretellers of events. He did on a grand scale what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah, to offend him. Furthermore, he put the carved image that he had made in the house of the true God, respecting which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, In this house and in Jerusalem which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I shall put my name to time indefinite. And I shall not remove the foot of Israel again from off the ground that I assigned to their forefathers, provided only that they take care to do all that I have commanded them, concerning all the law and the regulations and the judicial decisions by the hand of Moses. And Manasseh kept seducing Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do worse than the nations that Jehovah had annihilated from before the sons of Israel. And Jehovah kept speaking to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. Finally, Jehovah brought against them the chiefs of the army that belonged to the king of Assyria. And so they captured Manasseh in the hollows, and bound him with 2 fetters of copper, and took him to Babylon. And as soon as it caused him distress, he softened the face of Jehovah his God, and kept humbling himself greatly because of the God of his forefathers. And he kept praying to him, so that he let himself be entreated by him. And he heard his request for favor, and restored him to Jerusalem to his kingship. And Manasseh came to know that Jehovah is the true God. And after this, he built an outer wall for the city of David to the west of Gihon, in the torrent valley, and as far as the fish gate. And he ran it around to Ophel, and proceeded to make it very high. Further, he put chiefs of the military force in all the fortified cities in Judah, and he proceeded to remove the foreign gods and the idol image from the house of Jehovah, and all the altars that he had built in the mountain of the house of Jehovah and in Jerusalem, and then had them thrown outside the city. Moreover, he prepared the altar of Jehovah and began to sacrifice upon it communion sacrifices and thanksgiving sacrifices, and went on to say to Judah to serve Jehovah, the God of Israel. Nevertheless, the people were still sacrificing upon the high places, only it was to Jehovah their God. As for the rest of the affairs of Manasseh and his prayer to his God, and the words of the visionaries that kept speaking to him in the name of Jehovah the God of Israel, there they are among the affairs of the kings of Israel. As for his prayer, and how his entreaty was granted him, and all his sin and his unfaithfulness, and the locations in which he built high places, and set up the sacred poles and the graven images, before he humbled himself, there they are written among the words of his visionaries. Finally, Manasseh lay down with his forefathers, and they buried him at his house. And Amon his son began to reign in place of him. 22 years old was Amon when he began to reign, and for 2 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And he proceeded to do what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, just as Manasseh his father had done. And to all the graven images that Manasseh his father had made, Amon sacrificed, and he continued serving them. And he did not humble himself because of Jehovah, the same as Manasseh his father humbled himself, for Amon was one that made guiltiness increase. Finally his servants conspired against him, and put him to death in his own house. But the people of the land struck down all the conspirators against King Amon, and the people of the land then made Josiah his son king in place of him. Chapter 34. 8 years old was Josiah when he began to reign, and for 31 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And he proceeded to do what was right in Jehovah's eyes, and walk in the ways of David his forefather. And he did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And in the 8th year of his reigning, while he was still a boy, he started to search for the God of David his forefather. And in the 12th year he started to cleanse Judah and Jerusalem from the high places and the sacred poles and the graven images and the molten statues. Further, they pulled down before him the altars of the Baals, and the incense stands that were up above he cut down from off them. And the sacred poles and the graven images and the molten statues he broke in pieces, and reduced to powder, and then sprinkled it upon the surface of the burial places of those that used to sacrifice to them. And the bones of priests he burned upon their altars. Thus he cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. Also, in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, and clear to Naphtali, in their devastated places all around, he even went pulling down the altars and the sacred poles, and the graven images he crushed and reduced to powder. And all the incense stands he cut down in all the land of Israel, after which he returned to Jerusalem. And in the 18th year of his reigning, when he had cleansed the land and the house, he sent Shaphan the son of Azaliah, and Maaseiah the chief of the city, and Joah the son of Joahaz the recorder, to repair the house of Jehovah his God. And they proceeded to come to Hilkiah the high priest, and give the money that was being brought to the house of God, which the Levites the doorkeepers had gathered from the hand of Manasseh and Ephraim, and from all the rest of Israel, and from all Judah and Benjamin, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Then they put it into the hand of the doers of the work that were appointed over the house of Jehovah. In turn, the doers of the work who were active in the house of Jehovah applied it to mending and repairing the house. So they gave it to the craftsmen and the builders to buy hewn stones and timbers for clamps, and to build with beams the houses that the kings of Judah had brought to ruin. And the men were acting in faithfulness in the work, and over them there were appointed Jahath and Obadiah the Levites, from the sons of Merari and Zechariah, and Meshullam from the sons of the Kohathites to act as overseers. And the Levites, each of whom was expert with the instruments of song, were over the burden-bearers, and the overseers of all the doers of the work for the different services. And from the Levites there were secretaries and officers and gatekeepers. Now while they were bringing out the money that was being brought to the house of Jehovah, Hilkiah the priest found the book of Jehovah's law by the hand of Moses. So Hilkiah answered and said to Shaphan the secretary, "The very book of the law I have found in the house of Jehovah." With that Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan. Then Shaphan brought the book to the king, and replied further to the king, saying, "All that has been put in the hand of your servants they are doing, and they pour out the money that is found in the house of Jehovah, and put it in the hand of the appointed men, and into the hand of the doers of the work." And Shaphan the secretary went on to report to the king, saying, "There is a book that Hilkiah the priest gave me." And Shaphan began to read out of it before the king. And it came about that as soon as the king heard the words of the law, he immediately ripped his garments apart. Then the king commanded Hilkiah and Ahikam the son of Shaphan, and Abdon the son of Micah, and Shaphan the secretary, and Asaiah the king's servant, saying, "Go, inquire of Jehovah in my own behalf, and in behalf of what is left in Israel and in Judah, concerning the words of the book that has been found. For great is Jehovah's rage that must be poured out against us, because of the fact that our forefathers did not keep the word of Jehovah by doing according to all that is written in this book." Accordingly Hilkiah, along with those whom the king had said, went to Huldah the prophetess, the wife of Shallum the son of Tikvah, the son of Harhes, the caretaker of the garments, as she was dwelling in Jerusalem in the 2nd quarter. And they proceeded to speak to her like this. In turn she said to them, "This is what Jehovah the God of Israel has said. Say to the man that sent you to me, this is what Jehovah has said. Here I am bringing calamity upon this place and its inhabitants, all the curses that are written in the book that they read before the king of Judah, due to the fact that they have left me and gone making sacrificial smoke to other gods, in order to offend me with all the doings of their hands, and that my rage may pour forth upon this place, and not be extinguished. And to the king of Judah, who is sending you to inquire of Jehovah, this is what you should say to him. This is what Jehovah the God of Israel has said. As regards the words that you have heard, for the reason that your heart was soft, so that you humbled yourself because of God at your hearing his words concerning this place and its inhabitants, and you humbled yourself before me, and ripped your garments apart, and wept before me. I, even I, have heard, is the utterance of Jehovah. Here I am gathering you to your forefathers, and you will certainly be gathered to your graveyard in peace, and your eyes will not look upon all the calamity that I am bringing upon this place and its inhabitants." Then they brought the reply to the king, and the king proceeded to send and gather all the older men of Judah and of Jerusalem. The king now went up to the house of Jehovah with all the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests, and the Levites, and all the people, the great as well as the small. And he began to read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found at the house of Jehovah. And the king kept standing in his place, and proceeded to conclude the covenant before Jehovah, to go following Jehovah, and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his regulations with all his heart and with all his soul, to perform the words of the covenant that were written in this book. Furthermore, he had all those who were found in Jerusalem and Benjamin to take their stand to it. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem proceeded to do according to the covenant of God, the God of their forefathers. After that, Josiah removed all the detestable things out of all the lands that belonged to the sons of Israel, and he had all who were found in Israel take up service, to serve Jehovah their God. All his days They did not turn aside from following Jehovah, the God of their forefathers. Chapter 35. Then Josiah held in Jerusalem a Passover to Jehovah, and they slaughtered the Passover victim on the 14th day of the first month. So he stationed the priests over the things under their care, and encouraged them in the service of the house of Jehovah. And he went on to say to the Levites, the instructors of all Israel, those holy to Jehovah, "Put the holy ark in the house that Solomon the son of David the king of Israel built. It is not yours as a burden upon the shoulder. Now serve Jehovah your God and his people Israel. And make preparation by the house of your forefathers according to your divisions, by the writing of David the king of Israel, and by the writing of Solomon his son. And stand in the holy place by the classes of the house of the forefathers for your brothers, the sons of the people, and the portion of a paternal house belonging to the Levites. And slaughter the Passover victim and sanctify yourselves, and make preparation for your brothers to do according to the word of Jehovah by means of Moses." Josiah now contributed to the sons of the people flocks, male lambs and male kids, the whole for the Passover victims for all who were to be found, to the number of 30,000, and cattle 3,000. These were from the goods of the king. And his princes themselves made a contribution as a voluntary offering for the people, for the priests and for the Levites. Hilkiah and Zechariah and Jehiel, themselves as leaders of the house of the true God, gave to the priests for the Passover victims 2,600 and 300 cattle. And Conaniah and Shemaiah and Nathanael, his brothers, and Hashabiah, and Jael and Jozabad, the chiefs of the Levites, contributed to the Levites for Passover victims 5,500 cattle. And the service was prepared, and the priests kept standing at their places, and the Levites by their divisions according to the king's commandment. And they proceeded to slaughter the Passover victim, and the priests sprinkled the blood from their hand, while the Levites were stripping the skins off. Further, they prepared the burnt offerings so as to give them to the classes by the paternal house, to the sons of the people, so as to make a presentation to Jehovah, according to what is written in the book of Moses, and thus also with the cattle. And they went boiling the Passover offering over the fire, according to the custom. And the things made holy they boiled in cooking pots, and in round-bottomed pots, and in banquet bowls, after which they brought it quickly to all the sons of the people. And afterward they prepared for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were engaged in offering up the burnt sacrifices and the fat pieces until night, and the Levites, for their part, prepared for themselves and for the priests, the sons of Aaron. And the singers, the sons of Asaph, were at their office according to the commandment of David, and of Asaph, and of Heman, and of Jeduthun, the visionary of the king. And the gatekeepers were at the different gates. There was no need for them to turn aside from their service, because their brothers the Levites themselves prepared for them. And all the service of Jehovah was prepared on that day to hold the Passover, and to offer up the burnt offerings upon the altar of Jehovah, according to the commandment of King Josiah. And the sons of Israel that were to be found proceeded to hold the Passover at that time, and also the festival of the unfermented cakes for 7 days. And there had never been held a Passover like it in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet. Neither had any of the other kings of Israel themselves held a Passover like that, which Josiah and the priests and the Levites and all Judah and Israel that were to be found, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem held. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, this Passover was held. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the house, Necho the king of Egypt came up to fight at Carchemish by the Euphrates. Then Josiah went out to an encounter with him. At that he sent messengers to him, saying, "What do I have to do with you, O king of Judah? It is not against you that I am coming today, but it is against another house that my fight is, and that God himself said that I should cause disturbance. Refrain for your own sake because of God who is with me, and do not let him bring you to ruin. And Josiah did not turn his face away from him, but to fight against him he disguised himself, and did not listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God. So he came to fight in the valley plain of Megiddo. And the shooters got to shoot at King Josiah, so that the king said to his servants, "Take me down, for I have been very severely wounded." Accordingly his servants took him down from the chariot, and had him ride in the second war chariot that was his, and brought him to Jerusalem. Thus he died, and was buried in the graveyard of his forefathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem were mourning over Josiah. And Jeremiah began to chant over Josiah, and all the male singers and female singers keep talking about Josiah in their dirges down till today. And they have them set as a regulation over Israel, and there they are written among the dirges. As for the rest of the affairs of Josiah and his acts of loving-kindness, according to what is written in the law of Jehovah, and his affairs, the first and the last, there they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Chapter 36. Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz the son of Josiah, and made him king in the place of his father in Jerusalem. 23 years old was Jehoahaz when he began to reign, and for 3 months he reigned in Jerusalem. However, the king of Egypt removed him in Jerusalem, and fined the land 100 silver talents and a gold talent. Furthermore, the king of Egypt made Eliakim his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But his brother Jehoahaz Necho took and brought to Egypt. 25 years old was Jehoiakim when he began to reign, and for 11 years he reigned in Jerusalem, and he continued to do what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah his God. Against him Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon came up, that he might bind him with 2 fetters of copper to carry him off to Babylon. And some of the utensils of the house of Jehovah Nebuchadnezzar brought to Babylon, and then put them in his palace in Babylon. As for the rest of the affairs of Jehoiakim and his detestable things that he did, and what was to be found against him, there they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Jehoiakim his son began to reign in place of him. 18 years old was Jehoiakim when he began to reign, and for 3 months and 10 days he reigned in Jerusalem. And he continued to do what was bad in Jehovah's eyes. And at the return of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and proceeded to bring him to Babylon with desirable articles of the house of Jehovah. Further, he made Zedekiah, his father's brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem. 21 years old was Zedekiah when he began to reign, and for 11 years he reigned in Jerusalem, and he continued to do what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah his God. He did not humble himself on account of Jeremiah the prophet at the order of Jehovah. And even against King Nebuchadnezzar he rebelled, who had made him swear by God. And he kept stiffening his neck and hardening his heart, so as not to return to Jehovah the God of Israel. Even all the chiefs of the priests and the people themselves committed unfaithfulness on a large scale, according to all the detestable things of the nations, so that they defiled the house of Jehovah which he had sanctified in Jerusalem. And Jehovah the God of their forefathers kept sending against them by means of his messengers, sending again and again, because he felt compassion for his people and for his dwelling. But they were continually making jest at the messengers of the true God, and despising his words, and mocking at his prophets, until the rage of Jehovah came up against his people, until there was no healing. So he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who proceeded to kill their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary. Neither did he feel compassion for young man or virgin, old or decrepit. Everything he gave into his hand. and all the utensils great and small of the house of the true God, and the treasures of the house of Jehovah, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, everything he brought to Babylon. And he proceeded to burn the house of the true God, and pull down the wall of Jerusalem. And all its dwelling towers they burned with fire, and also all its desirable articles, so as to cause ruin. Furthermore, he carried off those remaining from the sword captive to Babylon, and they came to be servants to him and his sons until the royalty of Persia began to reign, to fulfill Jehovah's word by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had paid off its Sabbaths. All the days of lying desolated it kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. And in the first year of Cyrus the king of Persia, that Jehovah's word by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, Jehovah roused the spirit of Cyrus the king of Persia, so that he caused a cry to pass through all his kingdom, and also in writing, saying, "This is what Cyrus the king of Persia has said. All the kingdoms of the earth Jehovah the God of the heavens has given me, and he himself has commissioned me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, Jehovah his God be with him. So let him go up.